So today's procedures, we'll start with the introduction from the senator who has proposed the LR. If you are here today and you're one of the identified testifiers, you will need a green sheet to be filled out and ready to either hand to the committee clerk or the page as you come forward. We ask that you fill it out completely, print it so it's legible, so that it goes in the official record correctly. If you have handouts, we ask that you have 12 copies to provide. If you don't have it, let us know, and we'll have the page provide additional copies. Please move forward to the designated chair. Ask that you speak into the microphone. Spell your name after you announce it so that it goes into the record. Let's see, no displays of support opposition to testifiers is allowed from the audience. This is a public hearing. This is not a public hearing, but an LR. All right, now we're going to go over and run through our sequence of events today. We'll begin with Senator Holdcroft. We'll do the introduction, followed by Adam, Chris, Brian, Sherry, Wayne, and then Senator Holdcroft will be back up to close.
Yes.
With that, Senator Holdcroft, welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Brewer and members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. For the record, my name is Senator Rick Holdcroft, spelled R-I-C-K-H-O-L-D-C-R-O-F-T, and I represent Legislative District 36, which includes West and South Sarpy County. The purpose of LR 357 is to propose an interim study to determine to what extent, if any, there is a necessity to bolster election security in the state of Nebraska. This hearing is being held as part of that study. I want to begin this hearing by saying that I have confidence in our Secretary of State and in the integrity of our elections in Nebraska. My goal in calling for this interim study is not to rehash past elections or to criticize any state officer or agency. My goal is to bolster the confidence of the electorate in our state elections. 3 events have occurred in the past 5 years which have significantly modified the way our election officials do business. First, COVID. Second, the advancement of electronic software and tabulating machines. And third, voter ID. I have decided to approach the study by concentrating on 4 broad areas: the maintenance of the election rolls, early mail-in ballots, tabulating machine processes, and post-election audits. Ronald Reagan, when negotiating with the Soviets on arms reductions, was quoted to say, "Trust, but verify." We have some very sophisticated machines, software, and processes, which should include independent verification when possible. Our current voter rolls are maintained by an application called Power Profile, created and maintained by ES&S. This is a nationally recognized software package used by many states to share information about voter registration across state lines. It is maintained by the Secretary of State. In Nebraska, it is now possible to register online and to allow election officials to use your electronic driver's license signature for verification purposes on mail-in ballots. Should there be additional measures at the county level to validate election registration? The number of mail-in ballots have exploded in some counties, largely due to the relaxation during COVID of who can vote by mail-in ballot. Election officials obviously lose control of ballots from the time they are mailed until they are returned, a period of time when they are most vulnerable to election fraud. Voting by mail is a privilege, not a right. I think we should take a hard look at reducing the list of individuals who vote by mail. Voting machines. I am not advocating for doing away with voting machines. The Nebraska voter wants to know who won the race by midnight of Election Day. That cannot be achieved by hand counting. However, there has been a lot of speculation and demonstration of the ability to hack into tabulating machines and to change the vote. Not in Nebraska, but in other places. There are third-party licensed groups who can conduct a non-destructive security survey to determine if our machines are vulnerable. To my knowledge, we do not do this in Nebraska, should we? Finally, post-election audits. This is the process by which a hand count of ballots is conducted and the numbers compared to the machine output. And we do this in Nebraska. By statute, I believe 3% is required, and the Secretary of State actually conducts 10%. This is the ultimate check to see if there has been any hacking into the machines. But is 10% enough? The Secretary of State has until the end of September to certify an election. Is it possible to do more than 10%? Can we do 50%? Can we do 100% post-election audits? The testifiers you will hear today have been invited to share their knowledge and experience regarding elections. First, you will hear from vendors of specific election-related products. Let me assure the members of the committee that these are not pitchmen. They are simply here to make you aware of some of the options out there for making elections more secure. Next, you will hear from 2 county election commissioners. They will share what they do in their counties to maintain the integrity of local elections, and will also share their thoughts on what was shared by the vendors. Finally, you will hear from a representative from the Secretary of State's office. Thank you, Chairman Brewer, for scheduling this hearing for LR 357. And thank you to the members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee for attending the hearing today. And I am glad to answer any questions. And I'll be here for close.
Thank you, Senator Holdcroft. All right, let's open it to questions for Senator Holdcroft. I guess I got one offhand. So from the time you got elected till now, you've had a kind of a chance to see how the system works, hear from folks that have concerns and all. If you were to narrow it to where you think the highest probability of concern or possible issues are, where would you narrow that to?
I would narrow that to the registration, maintenance, and then mail-in ballots. I think that's where we're most vulnerable. I think once with the ballots get to the election commissioners, the process of feeding them into the machines, tabulating the results, doing the post-audit, I think those are pretty solid. I'd like to see an expansion a little bit of that, of the number of audits done. But I think our biggest vulnerability, and I think it's largely due to COVID, was the ability to essentially not show up in person like we did when we first registered to vote. We went in there with our driver's license, and then we signed the paper to register to vote. Now you can just sit, anyone, not even the individual can sit in there. As long as they have the driver's license, they can register to vote electronically. And so how do you validate that? And then, I mean, again, due to COVID, mail-in ballots are, in some counties, are 50% of the vote. And to me, that just opens us up to vulnerabilities.
In your district, as far as the most recent legislation with voter ID, have you heard issues one way or the other there?
Not at the polls. I mean, and now each, and this is, I know we have Brian Cruz here from Douglas County, and I have talked to Emily Ethington from Sarpy County, and there's some flexibility in how the election commissioners do validation of mail-in ballots, for instance, and they're different. I think Sarpy County is much more, I would say, strict about validation and accepting of mail-in ballots than Douglas County. So, I think in my county, answer your question, Sarpy County, I feel pretty good about the mail-in ballot validation.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions for Senator Holdcroft? Senator?
Thank you, Chairman Brewer, and thank you, Senator Holdcroft, for calling this interim study. You mentioned and I can ask the Secretary of State if you don't feel comfortable with answering this. That might come later, but you spoke about the audits. 10% are audited.
Yes.
Is that audit more or less just an audit of the tabulation process?
No, that's not actually. And at least in Sarpy County, they do. I think they do a pretty adequate job. She has 3 teams. 3 on each team. They actually take the paper ballots. They count them. And I'll let Wayne can give you a lot more information on this, but the Secretary of State selects the races that he wants to have audited. He divvies those out to the various election commissioners and clerks, and then they form their teams, and they actually take paper ballots, they tabulate them, and then they compare them to what the machine said.
So it is a process of the accuracy of tabulating ballots in and what the machine tabulates.
Correct. I mean,
Right.
it's to me, it's a valid check of the machines, of whether or not they've been hacked or not. Because, I mean, no kidding, you're looking at the actual results from counting the ballots, and you're comparing to what the machine said. So if there's been any funny business going on from the machines, that's where it should be revealed. The only question I have is 10% enough?
The question I have is where, we can ask the secretary, representative from the secretary's office, after it's tabulated and audited, or after it's tabulated on all the machines, that information is, I assume, then sent to the Secretary of State's office.
Yes, to my knowledge.
It's
Better question for him, I think.
okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Yes, Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Senator Holdcroft, thank you so much for bringing this bill forward. I think voting is such a privilege for us in America and deserves certainly the respect. And if there is a margin of error, let's find it. And I'm curious to hear about the process from the time I vote till it counted and verified. So thank you for bringing this forward.
All right, additional questions? You're going to stick around?
Yes, sir.
Good deal. All right, thank you. Okay, Adam, you're first up. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Chair Brewer and senators, thanks for having me. Is this coming through? So my name is Adam Friedman. I'm the founder and CEO of Severa. My last name is spelled F-R-I-E-D-M-A-N, Adam Friedman. And you have my contact information in these handouts. I'm a software engineer starting in 2007, founded Severa in 2012. Our company is a civic innovation lab based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We work with 9 U.S. election authorities on taking troves of historical election results data and making coherent, useful, searchable databases for the public. It was founded out of my own frustration trying to do analysis and develop reporting on Massachusetts elections, which are woefully uncompetitive, and of those that are competitive result in often non-majority winners. Some elections have as little as 17% or 23% winners in those races. So in developing a report to try to just look at this objectively, I was very frustrated with the state of the election results data and was able to extract them from these static almanacs and develop what became election stats. And out of election stats, I had my eye on ballots and cast vote records. And it always occurred to me that if there were any public record, if there are any record the government keeps that ought to be inspectable by the public, it should be ballots. As long as it can be done in a safe and a secure way, ballots are the ground truth, the very proof that the person who is governing over everyone else deserves to be there. So it always struck me as curious as to why that wasn't possible. With the technology we have today, it is possible. We developed in conjunction with Ada County in Idaho, a tool called the Ballot Verifier, which you have in the first brochure from my packet. That tool has gone on to get some national recognition. There's an insert article in Wired magazine, which some of you are reading, instead of listening to my eloquence. I'm just kidding. And that highlights the need for this. We're in a time where election administrators, as you've been hearing, are getting hammered by public records requests. They're getting harassed. And there's two paths that administrators could go. One is to lock things down even more, batten down the hatches and say, we're not going to enable the skeptics, enable the theorists. And then there's another path you can go that you can embrace what the public is asking for, and you can actually knock the wind out of the sails of the worst of the skeptics and bring over the reasonable middle that will see the system works actually exceedingly well in almost all cases. And people can't really determine that without the ground truth of being able to analyze and audit for themselves the ballots and the cast vote records. So what the verifier does, it allows users to go on a public website and literally turn a black box into a glass box. They can open up, they can do any search for any past election result, and they can filter it by office, district, a particular precinct, a particular vote type, absentee voting versus election day voting. They can slice and dice this data. They can look at contest results. And then along with those results, you have a kind of ballot box of the digital images of every cast ballot side by side with the cast vote record, which is the proof of what the ballot machine read. So every user can, at an atomic level, verify that every machine read every marking truly and fairly. And they can also verify the aggregate, which is the Severa system takes in these materials and does our own live tabulation of the cast vote records. And our staff ensures that those numbers reconcile, that those cast vote records aggregate to the exact same totals that were published upon certification at the time of that election. And we link every contest to the official report from that election so that users can verify at the aggregate level, as well as the side-by-side atomic level of each ballot. So Ada County launched this. We had a press conference in April, and then the article got a lot of good local news on that, a lot of positive coverage. And then Tarrant County, Texas, which is one of the larger counties in Texas, also launched this tool a couple of months ago. And we've been getting a lot of interest from other counties and even states around the country for this. So Texas passed a law last June of last year that requires their counties to post, to make digitally available the ballot images and the cast vote records. Wisconsin already has laws in the books that allow this. Colorado, there's a lot of desire for this, and counties are offering this up to the public. And of course, there's certain considerations that need to be taken into account when you're doing this, which we can get into during Q&A. I can address a few now. So one concern is voter privacy, is ensuring and maintaining the secrecy of the ballot. That should be a top concern. The ballot verifier, as many laws in the books do around the country, provides what's called voter privacy masking. So in the event that there's a precinct with very few ballots cast, we will redact. We have the option to give to the administrator to redact ballots, the CVRs, and even the vote counts, the precinct level counts, to protect those low population, low turnout areas. That's pretty standard. Another concern may be, well, what if people can download these images, manipulate them, and cause more havoc, more FUD? That's actually very easy to solve. This would be where we would use hash validation, which is, if we can, carry forth the voting system vendor's digital signature on every image and store it. If anyone makes a change to that, the signature will be broken. Severa also provides its own hashing. And if anyone were to make a change to the file, you could put it through any generic MD5, that's the algorithm, hasher, and it would show the hash would change, which would prove that someone changed the image. So it's a pretty easy fix for that. Couple other concerns. What about vote buying? Would making ballot images public, incentivize some sort of scheme to mark your ballot in some way, and then you verify with someone who could see that, and you get some sort of payout, some sort of scheme? Well, the unfortunate reality is vote buying would be very, very likely today, because everybody has a smartphone in their pocket, and everybody can take a photo or a video of them mailing their ballot in or putting it into a machine in a polling place. So it's actually easier to have some sort of vote buying scheme today without a transparency layer for the public and third parties to scrutinize and audit the results. If you put those images online for folks, or you make them available, Now you can actually see the pattern. If there is some sort of coordination, you could have forensics experts look at these materials and find those patterns. Without this, you cannot do that. They're under lock and key, and that would be impossible to trace back a situation like that. So that's the basics of ballot verifier. We have another, we could stop for questions for that before we touch on election shield, which uses statistics to find anomalies in results.
All right. Yeah, let's kind of stair step this so that we don't get too far into things and then have to go backtrack.
Yeah.
So for the system you're talking about here, the state would have to hire you, or hire the company to come in to have kind of a post-election oversight of what's happened, to take the data and roll it together, to then compare that to the results and make sure it all lines up correctly. That kind of
Roughly speaking.
Reader's Digest version of
Sure,
it.
sure.
Okay, and the key things that you're going to need in order to do that review is the cast vote record, and what else?
And this is optional, but a scanned image of the actual marked ballots. So modern voting machines do snap a photo or take a scan of the image. Administrators have the option to toggle that on or off. Some toggle it off and then it would be available. But for those that it's on, there'll be a corresponding image that goes with that cast vote record. And that's key for that kind of atomic level ballot level verification, reconciliation.
And what is there kind of a limit on how many ballots that you're able to digest and work through, or?
We're doing we're piloting a Georgia project right now with Yale University. We're looking at well over a couple million ballots that we're experimenting with. So we can do in the millions. That's not a problem.
We don't have that many, so.
Yeah.
All right, let's see if I have questions for you. Questions on phase one? Yes, Senator Lowe.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. What would the cost be to the city or the county to hire your services to do this?
I'm sorry, I didn't bring a contract, so I'm not really ready to have this. No, we are, the cost is a sliding scale based on a few factors. One is population, of course, your voter registration list. The other is just the complexity of your voting system vendor or vendors, if there's multiple vendors, and just ensuring we can reconcile all of them into one unified system. We can, it's just a matter of cost. The cost can range from as little, for a very small county, because counties and cities can use this as well. It's not merely a statewide solution. Right? It can vary from $5,000 to $10,000 per year to the millions. So it's something like Texas, we would quote at, over $4 million per year, which even for Texas is not so much. So we try to ensure that it's quite affordable. So we can kind of work proportionally off of their population to get a rough ballpark for what it would cost Nebraska.
Have you checked with the ES&S if you're compatible with their software and their images?
Yeah, so we've already analyzed the three major voting system vendors, Dominion, ES&S, and HART. So our implementations in Tarrant County and in Ada County, Idaho are with HART. And we are working actively right now with building adapters to ES&S and Dominion. It is compatible. So one other feature of the system, which is that it's wholly segregated from the sensitive tabulation system, the voting system that's used on election day. The elections administrators kind of throw the images and the cast vote records over the wall to Savera, which is great. So that there's always the safe copies, safe digital and paper copies with the administrators. And then Savera has this kind of viewable area of matched materials. And that's our job. Just like we do with historical election data, we just normalize these materials and make them all universally presentable. So we're actually looking forward to when we can do a single implementation with all three, or even some of the minor voter system vendors like Clear Ballot and Unison and others, to normalize all of them so that voters have one coherent view, no matter if there's a checkerboard of various vendors being used on the ground in counties.
Thank you.
Additional questions, Senator Holler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here, Mr. Freeman. So how does each state's information come to you? Is it communicated through information that is accumulated or aggregated, tabulated by the voting machines?
So, yeah, yes, that's exactly right. So the idea is in a modern voter's voting system, this is very, very high level. The voter puts in their card, their ballot. The voting system records a couple of things. They record, well, lots of things. They record a timestamp when it happened, which we don't get. But they'll record cast vote record, which is the machine readable votes on their ballot for this contest, and then they'll just snap an image of the ballot. Those two materials are what we want. Those two materials are what the end user needs, or someone who wants to see each ballot coming in. Did the machine read it as it was supposed to? And then those machine readable votes, that is what's used for the tabulation for the election. And that's also what Severa uses to run a second tabulation on our end to ensure we construct those contest views for the person doing the search, where those numbers, the totals, match the totals of the election report.
So you'd be providing to the state a software program basically to do this, or you would?
Correct. If you were to scan the QR code on the back of your ballot verifier brochure, that is our live deployment in Ada County, where you can use the site and you'll see exactly how it works. And I wish we could have it set up here and show you. Yeah, that's right.
Have you had any independent cyber investigators investigate whether or not your system is hackable?
So we are working toward what's called SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, which is a standard of data security and conformance to protect PII, sensitive data. We're diligently working toward that. We have our own internal cybersecurity reviews on a regular basis. We run quarterly penetration testing. So I guess in regards to your question, we haven't hired someone specifically for that from the outside, but we've certainly used vendor tools to do that. We have internal reviews that we do. And then the SOC 2 will require a 3-month audit at the beginning of next year.
So would you be okay if the state of Nebraska investigated whether or not your program was hackable?
Absolutely. We'd be more than okay with that.
That's refreshing.
Yeah.
All right, additional questions, Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Thank you for being here. As none of us, I don't think, are software engineers on this panel, I might need help from you to articulate this question.
Okay.
So where are the vulnerabilities when you write a software that talks to the machine? Because if you write the software, you know where the loopholes are and can be tweaked, I'm hearing. So is that a possibility, and where are the vulnerabilities that we need to pay attention to?
Great question. Okay, so let me take your phrase, talk to the machine, and it's the machines are interfacing directly, which is a huge no-no in elections. It's air-gapped. It's not internet connected. There's no interfacing with anything outside your sealed system, which is exactly how you want it. The process of transmitting the cast vote records and the images would be used using a manual export process from the air-gapped internal voting system from a trained internal election technologist in the government, whether that's the county office or what. That would be then transferred through secure FTP on Severa's hosting environment. So that link is really the one link of internet connection between the workstation, one workstation, but it's not connected to the vote tabulation system in any way, shape, or form. It's a totally separate workstation in an office. And so at that point, Severa has those materials. So the only other thing that's a vulnerability, and this is something we've also had to grapple with, is if voters mark their ballots with stray marks or identifying marks. So that's another concern that's been brought up in Colorado and elsewhere. We've developed the ballot redactor in order to allow very quick review and redaction of those marks. So insofar as there are marks, and this again, we're talking huge edge case, but these are the kinds of things we have to think about. Major edge case, sub 0.1% of most elections, if that. If Severa has possession of those materials, those may be sensitive. So our policy is once they're redacted, we just delete them from our system completely, and we keep only a redacted copy. That's the only instance in which we might allow any sort of change or modification to a ballot image. That's only to protect voter privacy of those very specific scope of edge cases. If they're writing their name or something on the side of the ballot, which happens from time to time. So other than that, these materials in several states are public record. They're non-sensitive. They're just reactive to public records requests. And so in that respect, they can be on a web server. They can be served. It's either they're going to be given in a transactional records request, or you have them online for people to not bother the office and self-serve and get that material that they want. So that's really the only vulnerability, just that small scope of potentially sensitive ballots. All the rest of the material is all out there, should be out there for states that, whether through constitution or statutory law, allow ballot images and or cast vote records. And that landscape is varied around the country. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
All
Thank you,
right,
Chairman
additional
Brewer.
questions, Senator Lowe.
Who maintains ownership of the images that are used for your software?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, there's always a copy of the images and the cast vote records that stay with the vote tabulation system. That's air-gapped, not internet connected. It's always available in the office of that elections office. Savera is getting merely a copy of this. So Savera will manage and host these images. By no means do we, or I think legally can we claim any ownership because it's public record. And so it's not really the ethics of our company. We would never assert that in any sort of contractual agreement or anything. The data is the public's data. We're just stewards of that. And we're trying to help the public get maximum access and usability of it.
So you wouldn't be able to sell the images or anything else, use the images for any
So
promotional purposes or things like that?
yeah, no. We have been approached by major political parties when we were producing these election stats public sites, which you can also visit around the country. But we've declined any offer because they often want it for political strategy purposes. And our philosophy is let's equip government to do technology better, so that every single end user, every citizen interacting with government has a better experience. So no, we have no interest in doing that.
Thank you.
All right, additional questions? Senator Holler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for clarification again, so the information that you will have will come as a result of what our voting machines tabulate and send to the Secretary of State's office.
Currently, my understanding, and Wayne and Andrew can definitely clarify a lot of this. My understanding is they send precinct level aggregate results that go into summary reports of races that might have precinct by precinct drill down results. My understanding is they do not send cast vote records to the Secretary's office. They could correct me if I'm wrong, but it's actually unusual for counties in states to centrally report that level of granular data, which is the ballot level. They're usually reporting as far down as the precinct level of drill down buckets, but not finer than that, because that's a lot more data to deal with. So no, but the counties, in my understanding, most of them have this, or some large fraction of them are storing this currently.
Okay, I'm not a conspiracy theory, but that doesn't discount the fact that sometimes there are conspiracies, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
Yes.
it's a word that's in the dictionary.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Conspiracies can happen.
That's right.
Sometimes theorists are off the wall, and sometimes it's like I tell people, I'm an avid conspiracy theorist, and my preferred pronouns are "I told you so." Okay. So that being said, if the machines, just hypothetically,
Okay.
if the machines had a modem in them that could be accessed by the internet, and someone, of deviant character hacked those machines and sent false information to the Secretary of State, would that interfere with anything that would question or be a challenge to the validity of what you do?
I mean, that's a pretty long hypothetical. I mean, if a machine
That's a
has
simple hypothetical. So
machine had a squirt gun in it, it would disrupt the polling site. Saying a machine had a modem in it is my understanding is that would be a big problem. I mean, if it's connected to the internet, that would be an immediate red flag, and I don't think that would fly in America. I I've never come across that. Now, I'm not a voting machine tabulation expert, so I'm not really the best person to.
But the question is, reliability of what you do is based upon the reliability of accurate information the machines tabulate.
Oh, okay, that's where you're driving. Absolutely. And that's our philosophy. Severa, we are a pass-through of the exact loyal rendering of what is happening on the ground. That is the entire purpose of this tool. And I had an engineer that said, hey, when we bring in the ballots, can I rename this to make it easier? And I said, absolutely not. Like, file name, nothing is touched. We take it, we store it, we serve it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, additional questions? All right, now let's transition to the other part there.
Okay, let me go into a different voice, just mix it up a little bit. Just joking. Thanks for having me again for Election Shield. So we're going to be talking about Election Shield. My colleague Stephanie Singer was not able to make this hearing. Election Shield is her invention. So this is Dr. Stephanie Singer. She's a PhD in mathematics. She is a former chair of the Elections Board of Philadelphia. She served between 2018 and 2022. She received 2 National Science Foundation grants from the Cybersecurity Division to develop her technology. Go many standard deviations beyond the mean. So bell curve has 2, 3, 4 standard deviations that go into the extremes, which is all a normal pattern that we see in nature, that we see in all sorts of activities. But when you have something that may be 6 or 10 standard deviations away from the norm, that's when you want to take a look at it. And so that, whether you're doing post-election audits, risk-limiting audits, or any of this good stuff with audits, all the audits are doing are ensuring that the count that happened during the election is the same count, or almost the same, and won't flip any results that happen later when you pull that paper again and look. Those types of audits do not address what Election Shield addresses. So one important point when Stephanie was chair of the Board of Elections in Philadelphia, a couple of things happened. As you know, folks are out there asking lots of questions about elections, and someone asked, they stuck a microphone in her face at a public setting and said, why were there so many provisional ballots in such and such precinct, in Ward 3, Precinct 2? And she didn't really have a good answer for that. Someone had been looking and scrutinizing, looking through the numbers. And so that kind of gave her a light bulb moment. She developed the technology, and she found that there were a lot of kinds of things happening around the country where sometimes errors occur, numbers get flipped, someone enters something wrong when they're reporting numbers, and it creates headaches, but it doesn't necessarily flip results, which is not the worst situation. But sometimes, like Interim, Michigan, and Harris County in Texas, you have situations where results are flipped because of anomalies and errors. And most of all, she used this to find some action in Philadelphia that led to convictions where the FBI was involved. So there's a union boss named John Doherty who's known widely as being pretty corrupt, but they could never get evidence enough to convict him. But in one case, there was a former congressman who was helping him, Ozzie Myers, who rolled on him. And why did Ozzie Myers roll on him? there was a basically judge of elections in Philadelphia that rolled on Ozzie Myers that basically was being paid off to stuff the ballot box. And no one had caught this until Stephanie fired up Election Shield, ran her tests, and found that one particular precinct had judge votes that were relatively too high compared to votes for mayor, which is just a random correlation. This contest for this candidate had votes that were too high for this contest, this candidate. And no other precinct in the city had that kind of pattern. And that's where it stuck out. So on its own, it doesn't just tell you fraud occurred, but that was the exact beginning trail of evidence that the FBI needed in order to nail the person stuffing the ballot box and then up the chain of command up to John Doherty. So thanks to that tool, we were able to get that conviction. That just happened, I think, in the last year. So our contention, we think that there's a lot of misinformation on both sides of the political spectrum. I think those on the left say the system is absolutely gleaming and perfect. No fraud happens. Those on the right say there's fraud at the highest levels, and the whole thing's corrupt. We don't take a hard position. We have a working hypothesis on this, and that is we think that fraud is much harder and harder and harder to pull off as you get higher because there's too many hands on it. It's too easy for someone to leak what's happening. But when you get lower down the ballot, there's two properties of that make it very tempting. Very low visibility on those races, not a lot of journalism happening, and very low vote counts in order to flip the outcome. So it wouldn't take as much to get over the threshold to change the result and win unfairly. So we would like to apply Election Shield as a backstop across the entire country to have a basic layer of data validation, data mining, to look for patterns, look for stuff that might be anomalous in order to protect elections across the country. So the best salve against some of these doubts is just to expose more ground truth and ballot verifier and Election Shield. Just offer more information and the best possible information that we can to promote just more rational, more careful, objective analysis.
All right, thank you. So we don't have any questions on Shield. Questions? Yes, John Lowe.
Thank you. And thank you for, again, testifying. So this mob boss that was stuffing the ballot box, how was he able to do that?
So I don't know the intricate details. Stephanie would be better to answer that. There is a system in Philadelphia that provides for these paid election judges that are kind of poll workers, and they are given a lot of independence. And I think there's a lack of purview at the polling location. They were able to basically, when there was a slow time at the polling location, they were filling out ballots and putting them in because there weren't voters in the space at the time. So it may have been there just weren't enough eyes or checks and balances there that they could kind of get away with that.
Thank you.
Okay, additional questions? Let's go through the handouts that you have here. So this is the Shield, which is the one you just talked about.
Mhm.
This is the opening. You have in here, this here, which is just kind of a roll-up of kind of your first test run.
Yep, this is our first deployment, Ada County, Idaho.
All right, so any other questions before we let Adam go? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Educational. All right, next up, Chris. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Chris Wlashin. That's ChrisWlaschin. I'm a Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for Election Systems and Software, commonly known as ES&S. I've been with the company 6 years and 6 months. Prior to joining ES&S as their CISO, I was the CISO for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C., overseeing cybersecurity policy for organizations in the department like Food and Drug Administration, Centers for Disease Control, Indian Health Service, and others. Prior to that, I was the deputy CISO for the Department of Veterans Affairs, a couple other public and private jobs in cybersecurity, and then almost 30 years in the U.S. Navy, active duty, and I retired 16 years ago from that. ES&S is a proud Omaha company. We are wholly American owned and operated. Our chief owner is a gentleman, a longtime Omaha resident named Mike McCarthy. He owns about 80% of the company. The rest of the company is owned by the company executives like myself. There's no foreign investment or foreign influence on ES&S. We have election jurisdiction customers in over 41 states. About half of the jurisdictions, the election jurisdictions in the country, use some form of ES&S product, be it voter registration, electronic poll book, ballot marking devices, or voter registration and tabulation. Our equipment is manufactured and programmed in Omaha, Nebraska. Yes, we participate in a global supply chain, but all of the hardware comes to Omaha for final assembly, and that's where we load the software. Our manufacturing processes are certified to several federal standards. Our software development is done in Omaha. We do not use offshore software developers or anything like that. We undergo extensive third-party testing of our products, both hardware and software. Not only does ES&S manufacture the hardware and software to meet strict federal security standards, but we give our hardware and software to several reputable third-party independent testing organizations and academic institutions to test our equipment, to make sure that it is secure, accurate, auditable, and reliable. We have an extensive partnership with the Department of Homeland Security, and we participate in many of the cybersecurity services that DHS, through the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, we participate in many of their offerings, including DHS coming on site to our headquarters in Omaha and testing our networks, looking for vulnerabilities. CISA scans our public-facing website, internet presence, our customer portal, and anything in ES&S corporate environment that touches the internet is scanned weekly by DHS looking for vulnerabilities. We also submit our hardware and software to the Homeland Security Critical Product Evaluation Program. This is a program that Homeland Security set up for critical infrastructure owner-operators. For example, the companies that manage oil and gas pipeline distribution, the power grid, nuclear power generation, Department of Defense, all send their hardware and software to one of 3 national laboratories for testing. ES&S does that as well to make sure that hackers cannot penetrate or alter our equipment performance or software. Excuse me. We have an equally strong partnership with the state of Nebraska, the Secretary of State and the election officials, and maybe more specifically, the county election officials across the state. We are lucky to live in Nebraska for a variety of reasons, but one is the way we vote on paper. A large majority of Nebraskans fill out a paper ballot and submit it for tabulation. A few Nebraskans that have physical disabilities vote on a ballot marking device. And that piece of paper, that card, is submitted as their ballot. These ballots are the record of the election and can be audited any number of ways. And I think that's why Nebraska leads the nation when it comes to the way we let our citizens vote. ES&S and me personally, I support the LR being discussed today and additional reasonable security measures that allow for the validation of the election results. We are already doing that in other states who have asked us to support rigorous pre-election logic and accuracy testing and rigorous post-election audits in many different formats. We support that because those processes compare the paper ballots to the performance or the results tabulated by the machine. And through that rigorous post-election audit process, the public can be assured that their vote was counted as cast. The clerks in Nebraska, I think, are the heroes of this state election process. There's not been much turnover in the clerks in the 93 counties here, and I'm very grateful for that. Other states are suffering terrible losses of experienced election clerks because of threats to them and other reasons. But Nebraska is stable, and we do elections right here in the state. Since ES&S began manufacturing electronic machines to support voting, roughly 2007, there have been no, and I mean zero, documented attacks on a voting machine that would change the outcome of an election. Zero. We are on our third generation now of election technology that we're building, and we're building this new election technology to the brand new Election Assistance Commission 2.0 standards. The technology in Nebraska used by Nebraska election officials has no Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. It cannot be accessed from an outside entity. There are no modems in the equipment used in Nebraska. These are standalone, isolated devices that are kept in chain of custody in secure locations between elections. They have thorough testing done on them, tamper-proof locks and seals placed on them prior to an election. All of that is monitored by election officials. And then they're audited after the election, as you heard other speakers say. In addition to being a cybersecurity professional for more than 20 years, I'm a citizen. I'm a patriot. I vote on these machines. My family in 4 other states vote on ES&S technology. If I thought for a minute that some of the wild accusations being made about our company or about voting processes in Nebraska were corrupt, I would call the Attorney General myself and report any malfeasance. But the fact is that none of that is based in reality. I am thrilled to be able to testify to you, the committee members here. For those of you who are veterans or have served or have family members that have served, I thank you for your service and sacrifice. You know what I'm talking about. And with that, I'd like to answer your questions.
All right, thank you for that, Odie. Your time in the Navy, what were your tasks there?
I started out as an enlisted man on submarines, working on computers. I served up through the rank of E7, Chief Petty Officer, and then I was selected for the Warrant Officer, Limited Duty Officer program. And then I served 14 years as enlisted and about 16 years as an officer, all in assignments having to do with electronic communications, radars, network security, physical security, and I retired as a lieutenant commander.
All right, well, thank you for your service. If we look at ES&S and we go nationwide right now, how many states use ES&S?
We have a footprint in 41 states and 4 of the 5 U.S. territories. That's not all inclusive. We provide some tabulation to those states. Some states use our poll books, our electronic poll books. Others use our voter registration devices. So we serve about half of the counties in the U.S. In some way, shape, or form across 41 states.
And if we compare you with, say, Dominion, they're bigger, they're smaller, roughly the same?
They're smaller. ES&S accounts for about 50% of the registered voters in the U.S. using our equipment. Dominion has about half of that, I would say 25%. And then Hart Intercivic, the third major player, has between 10 and 15%.
All right, so we have for questions. Questions? John Lowe.
Thank you for being here and for moving to Nebraska. Third-party testing, do they try to hack the machine at all?
They absolutely do. And that's a condition of the engagement we have with them. We ask them to analyze our hardware and software looking for vulnerabilities. And then we ask them to attempt a penetration test to see if they can plug rogue USB devices into the device and manipulate its operation. We ask them to dissect our software line by line, millions of lines of code, looking for hidden software or hidden algorithms or any way that might be able to manipulate that software and bypass the multiple layers of security that we employ in our technology.
Can a piece of hardware, a modem, be turned on for just a specific period of time so that it is not found at other times?
It's possible. The perpetrator would have to gain access to the machine, be able to insert a USB-based modem or somehow implant a modem into the device, connect it so that it would operate, install software that would allow the modem to communicate. In order to do that, they would have to defeat the military level encryption that we place in our hardware and software to encrypt results and to reject foreign objects from being inserted. Hypothetically, it's possible. Would it affect the machine outcome? Absolutely not. And here's why. Because we design these machines and the software in them to detect any foreign or unknown objects from being plugged into them. And the first thing that machine will do is turn off or alert the poll worker that something is not right. That machine would be taken offline, replaced with a new known good machine. We would quarantine it and then try to dissect what happened to that machine.
Are all the machines in Nebraska ES&S?
Yes, all the tabulators are manufactured by ES&S.
And you said there's a new generation of software that you developed. Are you able to use that in our machines?
Yes, so the machines that Nebraska, you'll have to help me with the version, but the latest generation of hardware is built to the new VVSG, Voluntary Voting System Guideline Standards 2.0. Those are already in the field, tabulators and ballot marking devices. The software is still in development. That is the long pole in the tent. And it'll take us a year or two to get that software ready to be certified by the federal lab and accredited by the EAC. But the hardware in the use in Nebraska, the 950s, the large central count tabulators that you may have seen at one of our demonstrations here for the legislature, the DS300, which is our latest precinct level tabulator, our ballot marking device, the Express Vote 3, are all built to be ready for that new security standard.
Thank you.
All right, additional questions? Senator Holler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here today. So the hardware, all the hardware is developed in the United States.
The parts and pieces from the supply chain come from all over the world. Same as your phone, the computer on your desk, the TV in your home. We collect those, and our contract manufacturer, Pivot International, which is a Kansas City-based company, they assemble those sub-assemblies. They take the chips and marry them to the circuit boards and build the sub-assemblies in a factory in the Manila, Philippines, which I have visited and conducted a security audit on. Those sub-assemblies come to Omaha for final assembly and rigorous testing. And then we load the software in Omaha.
So your level of confidence seems to be pretty high that this hardware does not have a chip embedded in it that could activate a modem, which would make it accessible to the internet at the bequest of whoever activates that modem from a cell phone or whatever the case may be.
That's correct. I have visited the factories the chip foundries where these chips are made. I've visited the Pivot International manufacturing plant where the chips are married to the printed circuit boards. I've conducted security audits to DHS and the National Institute of Standards security audit for manufacturing processes, interviewed employees. I've seen how the chips get put on the circuit boards and how they're x-rayed, looking for hidden pieces or parts or small chips. We monitor the manufacturing process from end to end to make sure that no malicious software or hidden components are placed on those subassemblies before they come to Omaha.
Would ES&S be opposed to having Nebraska engage a forensic investigator to investigate whether or not the machines would be accessible to the internet?
We would not object to that. In fact, we are supporting that kind of a forensic audit in, I believe it's Utah right now, and we have done others in the past. For a reputable professional investigator to conduct an audit like that, we would support that.
Good. Okay. I would recommend that we look into that.
Okay, additional questions? Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer. Thank you for being here and for your service.
Thank you.
And thank you for manufacturing parts in the Philippines who have been our allies for proven 100
Yes.
years, right? So thank you for that. When a concern comes to whether it's one of us or the election commissioner, and that concern is submitted to your office saying there is possibility breach in the count, kind of just walk me through the guidelines of when you take a concern and verify it or not.
Sure. So ES&S takes any report of a machine malfunction or a questionable outcome. We take that very seriously. We have a team in Omaha of software and hardware experts that work with state and county officials to review that claim to see if there's any validity to it. We can provide subject matter experts alongside any state or county investigation of election results to determine if the machine was truly manipulated in a malicious way, or more likely, and it rarely happens, but is often the case, there was an error in laying out the ballot or programming the machine so that one race is counted differently than another. It is infrequent, but it does happen. It's human error. And that's generally what the outcome of these investigations are. We support root cause analysis of any deviation from tabulation, counting or errors or processes. And we help the state and county officials communicate to the public about what happened, trying to reinforce public confidence in our technology. So our team in Omaha guides that support of the county or the state doing the investigation. And if it's our fault, we take responsibility for it, as has happened in the past.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
All right. Additional questions? Senator Lowe.
No, go ahead. I'll back clean up.
Okay. So with all the different elections in Nebraska that we have every 2 years, does ES&S print the ballots for these elections so that they're compatible with your machines? Or is it up to the county clerks to do that?
Well, every state does it a little bit different. Do we print for every county but us? Okay, we print for every county but Douglas County, who was our first customer, by the way, back in 2000 and early 2000s. We print those ballots, and we only do that after a rigorous layout and review process, proofing of those ballots to make sure that every county's candidate and race, referendum, proposition, it is all perfect in its display or how it is laid out on the ballot. that it complies with state law about who's listed where and all of that. Rigorous proofing. After the county approves that, we print the ballots and send them to the counties.
How many different kind of ballots in election year are there in Nebraska?
Oh my gosh. So ballot styles is what
Every
you're,
city, every county's got something different.
everyone's a little bit different. Some of them have utility district races. Some of them have judge retention races. It can depend on the periodicity of an office holder running for office and the turnover in that office. Federal ballots are generally laid out in a standard way for president, vice president, and governor and other things like that. Federal Congress representation, but the small elections can just have one race, one question on it sometimes. It just varies by the time of year and the periodicity of the election.
Thank you.
All right. So, Conrad.
Hello, good morning, friends. Sorry, I had a sick child this morning, so I was juggling childcare issues. I know a lot of people can appreciate that, but I was listening to the entirety of the hearing and am pleased to have the information presented to the committee today. I just wanted to follow up in regards to a question on forensic audits and a thread that you started to dialogue with my friend Senator Halloran about. And you had indicated that you were working through a forensic audit in a sister state of Utah, perhaps. What prevents you from doing that right now?
Nothing. The Secretary of State, probably on the advice and consent of the oversight of the committee here, could contact ES&S and propose a forensic audit of equipment in Douglas County or any one of the counties where our equipment exists.
Okay.
We would work together on a statement of work that defines the extent to which the audit would occur. It could be a physical examination of the tabulators. It could be imaging of the software that's on the tabulators. And that routinely involves making a copy of the exact software that's on a tabulator and then have it examined by a professional software evaluator or a security company, something like that. In Utah, they are trying to they're trying to detect if there's any external connectivity in their machines. So while our contract and our assurances to them state that there is no Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or modem connectivity in the machines, they're using a professional service to set up a test environment, turn the machine on, and detect if there's any transmissions emanating from the machine that would indicate some type of wireless or Bluetooth modem connectivity. It's a very thorough examination that also includes testing the machine's operation, putting a test deck, a volume of sample ballots that they have marked and know the outcome to through the machine multiple times to see that it tabulates correctly. All of these activities are designed to conduct a professional evaluation of the technology to make sure that it only does what it's programmed to do and nothing else.
Okay, that sounds helpful. I wanted to ensure, just to clarify for the record, there was no prohibition on that kind of activity happening under current law, that if there was a need that county election officials saw or the Secretary of State saw or you saw internally, nothing prohibits you from having independent forensic investigation at any time.
That's correct. Professional, independent investigation of our technology is allowed under our contract with the state. What's not allowed is access to our machines by casual, self-proclaimed
Right.
election professionals. We'll work with the state and any approved entity that the state wants to bring to this forensic audit.
Very good. And then do you have a sense about, and obviously it might depend on the scope of things or maybe just based on the Utah experience, about the cost and timeline associated with the forensic audit process? And perhaps it also goes to the scope of work, of course, and what's
Yes.
being tested, but just generally.
My
speaking.
sense of the Utah effort is that it started earlier this month after their primary, and they plan to do a thorough document review and capture all the images of the software and this testing prior to the general election. Through the general election and for several months afterwards, it will take these independent auditors, I'm told, until January to produce a preliminary report. They are very thorough. The information that they collect needs to be dissected and reported upon. It'll take, I think the total effort will be 6 months or less.
Okay.
They're very sensitive not to disrupt the county who is volunteering this equipment. This audit is very sensitive to not disrupt the county's preparation for the general election.
Yes, that makes sense. So I guess just to follow up, to put a finer point on it, if nothing prohibits your company or county election officials or the Secretary of State from engaging in an independent forensic audit, you have not done so because you do not believe there's a reason to do so?
Well, we have not been asked for a forensic audit by the Nebraska Secretary of State. We have complied with requests from other states that have done that. In my mind, there's no reason other than there's a big election coming up there's no reason to deny access to our technology in the state of Nebraska for a forensic audit.
So your point of view is we have nothing to hide. You want to have a professional, an independent professional come in and verify each step in the process and the component parts thereof. That's fine by us.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. From your vantage point, being with the company for 6 years and 6 months, I think you said in your opening, an extensive background in this area of both law and technology. Is there are Nebraska elections secure? Let's just put a fine point on it.
They are secure for a couple of reasons. One, of course, the technology. We have tested it thoroughly in many different ways to make sure that it operates as designed. You know, we build boxes that count ballots, and we have tested it in any number of ways, as have multiple other states, academic institutions like the University of Connecticut, Rochester Institute of Technology, excuse me, and the Idaho National Lab, one of the 3 national labs that operate under the DHS critical product evaluation. The technology is secure. The processes that are used in Nebraska are the best because our clerks are trained to conduct thorough pre-election logic and accuracy testing. They train their personnel. They make sure that equipment is locked up and not accessible in between elections. And then our state, the way we vote on paper ballots is immutable to me. Paper ballots are the record of the election. That is what gets audited for official results. And that combination of secure technology, effective processes, and paper ballots, in my mind, is what makes Nebraska elections secure.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because, of course, we're all thinking about and watching what happened in our sister states in past elections, whether that's, you know, the chaos in the Florida election and Gore v. Bush, whether that's claims that have popped up about voter fraud or integrity in other jurisdictions, particularly in the wake of the, 2020 election.
Yes.
But I do think it is important to always monitor what's happening in our sister states, but also to be crystal clear about what's different or the same about how we conduct our elections in Nebraska. And I agree. I think that we have a lot going for us when it comes to being able to give voters confidence in their vote, which is precious and not a privilege, but a right. I think that's pretty clear. The other question I had for you, and this may predate your tenure at the company, but hopefully you've been there long enough to be able to visit about it. But Nebraska actually was a very early adopter of no excuses, vote by mail, absentee balloting for a lot of different good reasons. And a lot of our citizens, that far predates COVID, with decades and decades worth of elections. And a lot of our citizens prefer that for a variety of different reasons. Are you aware of any significant issues or claims of fraud or matters that would call an election into question in Nebraska based on vote by mail?
Not in Nebraska, but other states have suffered minor isolated abuses of vote by mail, whereby citizens in other states may receive more than one ballot
Sure.
and attempt to vote both. That doesn't happen in Nebraska because of the tight processes that the Secretary of State and state election officials have put in place.
Great. That's really helpful. And then, of course, we have, 11 or 12 counties now, predominantly in rural Nebraska, that have been all vote by mail for some time.
Yes.
So we have a lot of good data and a long track record in Nebraska about how these processes work, and always room to improve, and always want to ensure we're on the cutting edge of guarding against those who do not wish our democracy well. So I appreciate the perspective that you're bringing there. I think I do have some other questions, but maybe some of our election officials might be better suited to answer those. And thank the chair and the committee and the testifier.
Thank you.
All right. Any other, Senator Holler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify a previous question and your answer to
Yes.
it. We've had mixed impressions, or maybe I have just had a mixed impression. When this topic came up before several times, we were under the impression from the Secretary of State's office that ES&S would not let us get into the machines or have an investigator, a legitimate investigator, get into the machines because it would void the warranty.
Our contract language states that only authorized individuals can access the machines. Normally that means county election officials, but we have stretched that to allow formal investigations or audits of our technology by people who are authorized by the Secretary of State to do so. That is possible. We received many requests to examine our machines outside of the Secretary of State or chief election official. And we deny those requests because we're worried that the machines could be broken or rendered unusable by clumsy examinations of the technology. I'm here to tell you today that we will allow the Secretary of State and any professionally trained security individual or company to audit this machine, a machine used in Nebraska for forensic purposes. I commit to you, we will do that.
Okay, I appreciate that. So a forensic investigation would include more than just the efficacy and accuracy of the tabulating process?
It does. The forensic audits that we have participated in include a detailed examination of the software that is embedded in the machine, both the operating system, the application, the firmware, all of that is available for a legitimate forensic audit to examine in detail, should the Secretary of State or state election official authorize it.
So it couldn't come, in Utah, did it come from the Secretary of State?
It came from the legislator's audit arm. The legislature has an audit function in the state of Utah, and they ordered the examination of Utah election technology, for which we are complying.
Okay, thank you very much.
All righty. Yes, Senator Lowe.
Promise last question. It was stated earlier that these machines take pictures of the ballots, and then that is what is then sent off to Severa. Do ENS take the pictures of the ballots?
Our tabulators can be programmed to take images of every ballot that passes through that. In the state of Nebraska right now, those tabulators are configured to take pictures of only ballots that have write-in candidates on them, so that election officials can examine those write-ins and determine their validity. Are they on the list of approved candidates, et cetera? It is possible, and it's a simple switch in the software to enable those tabulators to take a picture of every ballot. That would be saved in a secure location, a secure thumb drive on the tabulator, and then available for air-gapped transfer to other entities.
That's going to take up a lot of terabytes.
It does, yes. It probably involves increasing the size of the secure and encrypted thumb drives that are in the hands of county officials right now. But we do that in plenty of other places, and we can do it here in Nebraska too.
Last question, I'm sorry. So I don't know that we have an auditing function for the election, and someone can clarify that for me if we do or we don't. But if we don't, would ES&S be okay? And this is a question, would the legislature be okay with it? But would ES&S be okay with the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee by majority vote requesting forensic audit?
I would cooperate with that request and any boundaries put on it by the Secretary of State or the state election officials to conduct that audit.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any additional questions? All right. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Endured a lot here.
Thank you.
All right. I think Brian Cruz, you're up next. This works out well. We're gonna find how it is done at the county level now. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good morning. Brian Cruz, do I need to spell and say mine?
Yes.
BRIAN KRUSC, Douglas County Election Commissioner. So I'll talk about some of the security measures we have in Douglas County. I'll start off with some of the physical measures we have in our office. We moved into a new building back in October of 2019. The building is a brick building. The only windows are the front entrance, and we do have concrete bollards in front of the entrance for security there. We have a security system, obviously. We did get a brand new camera system this year. We now have 39 cameras that monitor inside and outside of our building, 24 hours a day, obviously. We have controlled access everywhere, like a lot of facilities do, a key card swipe. And then where ballots are kept in the vault or the counting room, you have to have double authentication. So you have to have a card swipe and a PIN number. We have a PIN pad to get in there as well. And so, we can control access for all of our employees as to which ones have access to that. Inside of our vault, which is right off the counting room where we store ballots, we have safes inside of the vault. And that's where the military-grade thumb drives, both ones that are blank or ones that are used to program or ones that have results on them, are kept. And we have different safes for each of those different options. And of course, we have a different combination on the safe than the PIN pad, and that's even more limited as to who has the combination to the safe. On election day, we always have sheriffs. We work very closely with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, and we always have sheriffs on site in the evening for traffic control, but during the day, we have deputies there throughout the day. Our sheriff did come out about a month ago. Mr. Bennett was there from the Secretary of State's office with him, and he just wanted to look through our security measures, the machines, see the seals on the machines, things of that nature, just so he had an idea, and he brought his chief investigator with him too. We do have drop boxes, which I'll transition into a little bit of by mail now. We do have 13 drop boxes in Douglas County. We do have cameras on every drop box that are 24/7 cameras. You know, some of the security features of our drop boxes too are, we do have concrete bollards around them. The slot on our drop boxes is extremely small. You can get maybe 3 or 4 pieces of paper in there. It's the way they're manufactured. We do have, this year we have just installed fire suppression systems in each of the drop boxes. It's a dry fire suppression system. It'd be highly, highly unlikely that you could start a fire in there, especially with the slot being so small, but we have installed that this year. You know, when our drop boxes are emptied, there's a whole process with that. We have a county vehicle, 2 individuals of differing parties. Each drop box has its own receptacle or bag with seals on it. And so there's a whole process with that. Again, those are under video surveillance as well. Our full-time temporary employees go through background checks when they are hired by the county. So there's that level as well. For the by mail ballots in Douglas County, it's no secret now, about 50% is by mail voting and 50% is polling place voting. I believe in Nebraska, we've had unexcused absentee voting since 2000, I believe. I'm going off of memory here. Somebody can correct me if that's wrong. But nearly a quarter of a century now, you've not had to have an excuse to vote by mail. We check signatures when the requests come in, and that's all done by humans. That's not done by a computer or anything of that nature. That's one of the reasons in Douglas County for the presidential general election, we'll hire about 140 to 150 full-time, temporary, and part-time employees. And we will work nights and weekends, and during the day we have a night shift, and then weekend work as well to process early voting requests and ballots. We now have the voter ID component, which the legislature put forth. You comply with that when you vote by mail at the time of your request. And so we check all of that information as well as the signature on the request. So if you do not meet all of the requirements on the request, you will not get a ballot mailed to you by us. Then when ballots are returned, we check the signature again at that time. We have a daily audit every day once ballots start coming back. We scan our ballots in by each drop box so we know where they came from and how many. We also go to the post office and pick up our mail every day. It's just another little level of security. The ballots aren't sitting on the mail truck while it makes numerous stops before it gets to our office. We go over there and get the mail, and we scan those in accordingly too. So we have different scans that we do throughout the day, checking them in, then checking signatures. Then at the end of the day, we compare the scans to make sure that we haven't missed anything or scanned something twice, something of that nature. And we do that each and every day. I would say on average, 77% of all ballots in Douglas County are now returned via a drop box. Our drop boxes are safe, they're secure, and clearly our voters like them and have embraced them across all political spectrums. We encourage voters to use our drop box. The post office is a valuable partner in getting mail ballots out, of course, but we all know that mail service is slowed. But you have about a month to get them out there. But it's the most direct way and the most secure is to use our drop boxes. You, the voter, put your ballot in our drop box and we pick it up. If you use the postal service, you put it in a box. It goes on a truck It goes through possibly several locations or different hands before it arrives at us. And so that's why we encourage voters to use our drop boxes for that very reason. It's the most direct way from the voter to us. So we have a process in place where the employees, if they don't think the signature matches or there's another issue on either the request or the ballot, it'll go to a supervisor. It goes up the chain of command, basically. It'll go to a supervisor, to our by-mail supervisor. She's been there over 25 years, the lady who oversees our by-mail early voting department. Then it'll go to the election manager. Then ultimately it'll come to my deputy and I, if we need to at that point in time. Some additional measures we have, as Chris mentioned, in Douglas County, we are an anomaly. We do program and print all of our own ballots in Douglas County. So ballots never leave our possession in Douglas County until they either go in the mail or they go to the polling place. So we and our 2 ballot printers are in our counting room, in that secure counting room. So after, I'll just briefly mention it, you've heard it, but we do all kinds of testing before the election, of course, Test X and all of that, to make sure that the machines are accurate. Post-election, we do a big, what we call canvass or audit. So when individuals go to the polling place, in the poll books, there's a barcode there. After the election's over, we have to scan all of those barcodes in where people signed in, and then we take all of those scans and we match them up to the number of ballots that were ran through for each precinct. And then we see if those match up. And if there's a discrepancy, then we'll work to determine. Sometimes, a lot of times, as Chris said, it's human error. When you're scanning books day after day, sometimes a scan gets twice. I mean, it's monotonous work. I mean, you know what happens. None of us are perfect. It's never malicious. It's just none of us are perfect. And so we have the big canvass or audit process. And then after that, we will have the hand count that's administered by the Secretary of State's office. They let us know which precincts, and we go and get the ballots, physically get the ballots out of the vault, and we bring them down and we hand tabulate those. We have started a pilot program in Douglas County. I guess it's not pilot anymore, but we now have allowed or are having observers that watch our post-election audit process. So they come to our office and observe that. And we work with the parties on that, the local county parties, to do that. So beyond that, I shared Chris's sentiments. I think elections are very safe and they're very secure and they're very accurate in the state of Nebraska. And we just have numerous checks and balances. And I believe voters should be given the option to vote the way they feel is most comfortable, whether that's early voting by mail, in person at the election office, or, on election day. The number one reason we hear these days that voters like to vote by mail is not necessarily because they're out of town or they're ill or anything like that, because they can sit at their kitchen table and they can research issues, candidates, judges. This time around in Douglas County, if you live in the city of Omaha, which is about 85% of the county, you will have 13 issues to vote on besides candidates and judges. 6 from the state, 2 charter amendments from the city, 6 bond issues from the city, and a good life district. So voters will have 13 issues to read through and to vote on besides candidates and issues. And that's the number one reason we hear people like to vote by mail, is because they can take their time in the comfort of their home, their office, or wherever it may be to research issues. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, well, thank you for that. I want to start off by asking you about voter ID, since I endured a 14-hour filibuster on it.
Yes,
Is
yes.
it working? Kind of give me a one over the world on it.
Absolutely. So May was the first election in which we had the voter ID. I would say that it went spectacularly well. We had over 95,000 people vote in Douglas County alone. We only had 11 of the special provisionals where people didn't have the correct ID, photo ID to vote. So 11 out of 95,000, I think, is, I would say, 100% success, or 99.999, whatever the decimal is. That's in large part to our poll workers in Douglas County, and I think across the state, the training they received, the media campaign that we have had from the Secretary of State's office. And I know all my fellow election officials across the state, beginning in January, even, well, I shouldn't say January, but we did begin even before, it was implemented exactly. But we've spent the last year going to all kinds of groups and organizations, all kinds of media outlets, and educating poll workers and voters. So in my opinion, it has been a big, big success. We're not looking for many problems in November. We know the numbers will be bigger because it'll be a bigger turnout for the election, but it'll still be relatively small. And of course, we found 99.9% of all individuals either use a Nebraska state ID or driver's license, because I think they said 98%, nearly 98% have that. And that's the most common use of the ID. So I guess the short answer is yes, it's been successful and it's been implemented quite well.
And that goes both in person and mail-in, they both.
Absolutely, yep, absolutely. Again, the easiest and simplest way for the by mail is to write your driver's license number or state ID number on there. In our office, if there is an element missing or we have questions, if we have an email or a phone number, we will attempt to reach out to the voter to correct that, to help him or her correct that issue.
All right, let's see if we don't have some questions for you. Questions from Ryan?
Okay.
Oh. Senator Conrad, sorry, I looked
Thank
right.
you, Chair. Bacon black,
They
back
keep
cleanup.
going,
this
right?
time. We'll take turns. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Chair. So let me just take a step back here maybe for a second and maybe broaden the lens to try and figure out what really the key issues are in this hearing, I guess, and in moving forward. So having sat on this committee for a couple of years and been involved in campaigns and elections for a couple of decades in different capacities, it seems to me that the main concerns around elections, and I think everybody shares the values and the belief that we don't want folks who are not eligible voting, right? We don't want people who are dead voting. We don't want people to vote twice, right? We don't want people to impersonate a voter, right? And then the other bucket around maybe errors in counting or tabulation or things of that nature. But those seem to be the biggest, most frequent kind of concerns that I think this committee's heard surrounding elections, particularly in recent years. So, Brian, maybe it would be helpful for everybody if you could just walk us through a little bit about, from the registration process to the voting process, what systems, laws, practices are in place to make sure that somebody who's not eligible is not voting. So whether it's age or citizenship or past criminal involvement, which I know is a little murky right now. But if somebody tries to register to vote and they're legitimately not an eligible elector, they're not eligible to vote, how does the system go about weeding that out, an ineligible voter?
Sure. Well, I'll start off by qualifying this a little bit. We have a statewide voter registration
Yeah.
system in the state of Nebraska. So I will try and answer some of your questions, but
Wayne can
Mr.
help out if
Ben,
he needs
Mr.
to,
Ben
sorry.
will be
And
much
if it's
more
better-
qualified.
If it's better, I can take it up with Wayne
Why don't
later.
you ask him? Because
yep.
and he knows all what happens behind the
He
scenes.
can think
and
on it
that,
then. Okay.
And,
But I
and
think
then we don't have to repeat ourselves.
Yeah.
Or,
that's very good.
Okay.
Thank you for that. But Brian,
Yes.
one other thing, and you had mentioned it, and I know that this has, always been available to a certain degree, and then Nebraska has provided some uniformity in the approach to poll watchers or observers in recent years through legislation and in cooperation with a lot of different stakeholders who are passionate about, ensuring each individual's voters' rights and overall election integrity and security. But if you could just perhaps remind the committee exactly about how these poll watchers, poll observers work on the precinct level, and then also, just reaffirm, and you just mentioned it briefly, when it comes to a tight race or a recount, people have the right to have observers there to watch that process work through. Your team itself consists of members of different political parties to ensure a level of fairness, I guess, at each
Sure.
stage. So if you would just help us understand the poll watcher observation piece, how your team is structured, and then the right to observation upon recount or,
Sure.
or hand count.
Sure. So, poll watchers are a valuable part of the process, and we've always welcomed them since I've been there in Douglas County. Again, to Chris's point, we have nothing to hide, and we want there to be fair and free elections. We all do. Of course, that's what the goal of everybody is. So poll watchers are a valuable process. I've had everybody from the Department of Justice as poll watchers to those appointed by nonprofit and party organizations. And, there is some limitation by statute. Poll watchers, by their very nature, are there to watch.
Right.
Interaction is to be limited. They're not to interfere. But of course, if they see something that they believe is incorrect, they should reach out to our office, the Secretary of State's office, or their organization immediately. And, we obviously will get those corrected as quickly as possible.
And let me just ask a follow-up there,
Sure.
because we want to have participation and uniformity and clarity and confidence in our elections, but the focal point needs to be on the voter themselves. The voter has the right to be free from intimidation when they cast their vote. The voter has the right to be free from harassment when they cast their vote. The voter has the right to cast their vote as they see fit. And of course, election workers have the right to be not subjected to harassment or interference or intimidation.
Yeah, and there are some state statutes, they have to be 8 feet away from sign-in books, ballots, where you cast your ballot, things of that nature.
Right.
And for some of the very reasons that you have stated. But the statute also says that, they can't be impeding voters or affecting the flow and things of that nature. We are fortunate. We live in a great state.
Yes.
Where 99.9% of folks are respectable. We have not had any issues in the past in Douglas County. I believe issues have been minimal around the state, if any.
Yeah.
We're looking for that again. My office does create, we have a 3-page handout for poll worker observers, and we cite the statutes in there, and it's bullet point, and we will send that to the parties in the different organizations. We ask them to distribute that to poll watchers so that everything is clear and concise, everybody's on the same page. There, you know, we also distribute that to our poll workers, of course, and talk about it in our poll worker training, just so everybody has the same level of understanding
Yeah.
and can cite the same statutes, essentially.
Yeah.
So
then just tell us then that helps provide clarity for how the poll observer, poll watcher piece works. But then for the observation piece, if there is a hand count or a contested or a recount, or when does that?
Yep.
I guess I didn't know it went from a pilot to a standard practice. That's
Well,
helpful to know.
I will say this, I believe the statute says counting parties can appoint one observer to watch the counting of ballots, which we have had observers in the past. Our new facility, I think the one thing I didn't mention is we have windows in our counting room as well.
Mhm.
From the lobby, if you come in, we have the desk where the public is serviced. We have two big windows right behind that. You can see everything. And then on the south side of the room, we have observation windows as well. If, like on election day, we are using that hallway and the room next to it because we're preparing ballots and bringing them over, so the observation window is unavailable on election day because there's live ballots and workers moving through there. So then we will set up computer monitors with the live feed in the lobby area so that observers can use that. But so there can be observers when you're counting ballots, but then if there is a recount, yes, there are statutes that allow for a representative to come and watch the recount as well. And usually, in my experience, it's been volunteers who are usually poll watchers. It's usually volunteers who observe election counting, but it's usually lawyers that will come for the recount.
Great, very good. I think that's all I have for now. Thanks, Chair. Thanks,
Okay.
Brian.
Yes, thank you.
Brian, one of the things that seems to be coming back as an issue that folks want to say is the flaw in our system is that some say that the counting process, they have confidence in. But when the data leaves that machine and is somehow shared then with the Secretary of State, that's where the fallacy, the flaw, the problem is.
Sure.
Explain to me how that process works.
Absolutely. So we have 9 machines in Douglas County. In 2018, I believe it was, the Secretary of State worked with the state legislature, and the state legislature allocated money to buy all 93 counties counting machines. So all the counting machines in Nebraska are owned by the state of Nebraska. And there's one general contract from the Secretary of State's office. So we have 9 DS-850s. At that time, they were the most modern machine. There's a DS-950 now that has since come out. But each county has different according to their needs. I have more machines and faster machines because of my volume. But what happens is, once we have ran the ballots through the machine, then, and the machines, as Chris has already said, are not connected to the internet, and they're never connected to each other either. So then you take a military grade thumb drive, which we get from ES&S, and you put that in the machine. We will break the seal where the port is. We have a seal in there. You break the port or the seal on the port. Then each machine has a thumb drive, and you take the results from each machine. Then we go to what we call an air gap computer. That's a laptop that is also provided by the Secretary of State's office that is not connected to the outside world. You put in our case, you put all 9 thumb drives in there, and then that brings all of the results together for every race from every machine. Then we take those results and burn them on an external CD drive. So like CDs, like we used to listen to back in the day. Then we take that CD Then we put it in a different external hard drive to a computer that is connected to the internet essentially. And then we send results to the Secretary of State's office through a secure portal. And then we will release the results on our website at the same time through that mechanism. Everybody now, at least in Douglas County, everybody gets the results at the same time. We don't give media results early. We don't give candidates results early. At 8 o'clock, the first results are boom on our website. Everybody gets them at the exact same time. Now, I would take the opportunity, if I may, just real quick. There are always some ballots in Douglas County, and I believe Lancaster, but Douglas for sure, that are counted after Election Day. So I just want to be very clear. We do not find ballots. We do not find ballots. We do count some ballots after Election Day, and that's part of the election integrity or security process. Ballots turn into our drop boxes and that come through the U.S. mail before 8 o'clock on Election Day. Our signatures are verified, and all of that process is done on Wednesday and Thursday following the election. They're opened and then counted on the Friday after the election. The reason we do that is because all of our resources on Election Day are focused on the polling places. We have 40 workstations, we have 40 telephone operators all day long answering questions from voters and poll workers. We don't have the staff, the ability, or the equipment to process all of those. And also, you have until 8 p.m. to turn those in. So if we get 10,000 ballots on Election Day, which we very well could, undecided voters or just voters who choose to wait, it's their choice to turn them in late. But you can see it takes time. I mean, even if we started at 8 o'clock and processed those all night long, we still wouldn't have them done by the next morning. You know what I mean? And then provisional ballots by state law, you have until the second Friday following the election. Now, on occasion, if we get done doing our processes, we may count early. In the presidential general, I can assure you we will not, because we'll have between 5,000 and 6,000 provisional ballots. So we will need that full week post-election to go through all of those. Provisional ballots in Douglas County is about an 83% acceptance rate. So it takes a little bit of time to do it, but if the voter does it and takes their time, there's a really good chance that their ballot will be counted.
If we were to shift and say it was Scotts Bluff, process is the same, just a smaller scale.
Essentially, I think, Sherry Schweitzer's here from Seward County, so she'd be I'd say a small to medium-sized county, and she can probably speak to that. Also, Sherry's been the county clerk for many more years than me, and, can probably speak to that better than me. Knows lots of different clerks and processes over the years.
Now, when it comes down to you're checking the signatures, how does that work?
So again, on the request and the ballots, those come into our office. We date stamp all of them, so we have a date on them. And then individuals sit down and they go through our power profile system, which is our voter registration system. So we also have agency sharing with the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. So that's how the component for voter ID is checked now on the request. So an individual sits down and there's a whole checklist they go through, but they check signatures with signatures that are on the screen in their profile, in a voter registration record. We often have numerous signatures for voters because, one, we do have TMV sharing, But if you did a paper form, we'll scan that in. There's other various forms that the election commission may ask you to sign, that our early voting request, we scan those onto the voter's record. So we do have, not always, but I would say for a lot of the folks, we do have numerous signatures in which we can compare to. And so we do that. And again, if for some reason they think that the signature doesn't match, then it'll go to a supervisor. It goes up the chain. If we don't think it matches, we will reject it. We'll send a letter to the voter. We'll either send a letter or an email, which is the letter in an email form. It's the same thing in Douglas County. And then we ask them to resubmit if they would like to. We tell them it was rejected. And then we ask them if you would still like to do this, to resubmit.
All right, thank you. Let's see if we got more questions. Senator Aller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Brian, for being here. God bless you for what you do and all the counties, what they do. And thanks for your explanation of the trail of the information coming from the machines to the air gap computer.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And the thumb drives.
Yes.
That feed and then eventually go onto a disk, burn on a disk. I feel like I'm in high school.
I know, right?
But so, and this is maybe a question in fairness to you, but the Secretary of State can probably answer this, or Wayne can answer this. The Secretary of State provides you this air gap computer?
Yes, that it was, I don't know if it was part of the big allocation that you allocated funds, the legislature allocated funds for.
Okay.
I don't know if it was part of that, but yes, the air gap computer, it's my understanding, was purchased and then
So all this
provided to us.
And that's fine, thank you. So all this information is aggregated onto this air gap computer, right? For each county. Does each county have an air gap?
I believe so,
Yep.
but Mr.
Wayne-
Benna can.
Wayne's giving the thumb.
Okay.
So my question, and this will be for Wayne, but it seems to me that, I mean, your description of the steps that take place, the air gap computer, the thumb drives, which are the best in the world, I'm sure, and very secure. But it seems like we have, this is my first understanding of exactly how that process works, and I thank you for that. But it seems like we've opened up more vulnerabilities. I mean, air gap computer, is it hackable? I mean, that's ultimately where all the information is aggregated, right? Sent to the Secretary of State.
Well, I would say that may be for a software engineer or somebody to,
Sure, no,
but
I understand.
in what I would say is it's the information from that election is on your gap computer, but it's never hooked to the outside
So
world.
how does that air gap computer communicate to the Secretary of State's office?
So then what we do is you take the thumb drives
Right,
and you put it on that air gap computer.
right.
Then once it has the results from the air gap computer in our office, there's an external hard drive
Mhm.
and it's burned onto a CD.
Mhm.
Then we take the CD with the results
Mhm.
from the air gap computer. We physically take that CD out,
Mhm.
like a CD you used to listen to. And then we take it over to another computer and put the CD in an external hard drive. This computer reads the results off the CD, and then they're uploaded to the Secretary of State's office and the outside world.
Vis-a-vis the internet?
It's a secure portal, so I would say, yes, it's the internet. To the Secretary of State's office, he can probably answer that.
Okay.
But the results then go on our website, which is definitely the internet.
We just gave Wayne a heads up for the question. That's all.
Okay.
I'm sure he can answer.
So I hope that helps explain.
It does. No, it does. And I thank you
Okay.
for that. It might create a little more anxiety for me, but that's fine.
Okay.
Well, like you need more.
I need-
Well, it was meant to give you more reassurance, so I'm sorry
No,
about
no,
that.
no, no, that's fine. They've got meds for that.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
That's a
Senator
different,
Lowe.
that's a different hearing.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Brian, for coming to
Yes.
testify today. How long do you keep the ballots, the actual paper ballots,
Mhm.
after the election?
So by law, we have to keep them for 22 months, which we do. We, in our office, we have 14,000 square feet upstairs, and we have a 6,000 square foot warehouse in the basement. So they're all kept in our basement. That's all under camera and security, just like up above, but 22 months.
Under lock and key and
Under lock and key and camera, absolutely. And then then they can be shredded, which we do. And we have to just, for one thing, for us, we have to for sheer volume. The only way that we wouldn't do that is if a judge, were to order us to keep them for some reason.
and you do a test to see if accuracy, 10% was given earlier.
Oh, yes. So on the post-election hand count audit, and Mr. Bennett can clarify this again if I misspeak, but I'm pretty sure this is right. In the presidential, in past elections, general elections, it's 10% statewide, but it's not necessarily 10% for each county. Like in Douglas County, we had 3 precincts with 3 races that we did. So that amounted to, 3,000 or 4,000 actual tallies we did amongst all the races and all the precincts. And so we do that each election for statewide. When we have special elections or city elections in Douglas County, we also do that. We also do that on our own, just to ensure, again, accuracy.
Some days, maybe a week or 2 following the election, once everything calms down, would it be possible to run those ballots back through the machines to get 100% count done?
So we do if there's a recount. To your point, we do if there's a recount. I will tell you this, in May of 2020, we had a recount in a county commissioner race, and there was about 6,000 votes cast in that, and there was a difference of 3 votes. And when we did our recount through the machines, and so we have the 9 machines, so, some of the ballots would have been counted on different machines because we just take boxes and take them to the next machine. So the recount also came down to 3 ballots. So you can see the accuracy of these machines. To answer your question, though, anything's possible, but the more you run the ballots through the machine, they get, it's like anything. The more you run them through there, they get ripped, they get torn, they get tired. Essentially, I don't know what other adjective to use. Also, we have to certify the election because then that has to be gone on to the Secretary of State's office so that they can certify, so that electorates can vote, so that, we can have inauguration, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a time crunch. I mean, there's a time frame there. I suppose anything's possible, but in that time frame, we're doing our audit, which is all hands on deck, the canvas and audit, where we're comparing every precinct and, the books and the ballots ran through. And so to do 100%, I'm not sure what the practicality is that from a time frame and other things, but
Peace of mind?
if you already have numerous steps in place for peace of mind, and our elections are accurate and fair. And We know that. We know that by the sampling and by all of our tests. So I guess that's what I would say.
And you also brought up that people like mail-in ballot because they can put the ballot on their coffee table or on the refrigerator and review it. Why can't they use a sample ballot?
Well, they could. Sure, they could. And we make those available on our website. So they absolutely can. And that is the big message we're trying to get out in Douglas County right now is for those individuals who live in Omaha that are headed to the polling place, you probably want to look at this before you arrive and stand in the booth for 30 or 40 minutes.
And my last question, you had said that people enjoy the drop boxes because it's convenient and it's the most direct route.
Sure.
Wouldn't the most direct route be bringing the ballot to the election commissioner's office where you get an actual and have them show an ID?
Well, we do the ID component now as set forth by the legislature on the request. It really, it's a convenience things for voters because they're open 24 hours, 7 days a week. And so for individuals, for all kinds of variety of reasons, illness, daycare, swing shift jobs, whatever, out of town, in town, on the way to the airport, et cetera. They can bring them to our office and we have a drop box in the parking lot. We have one in the entryway and we have one inside our lobby. So we do have some voters that do choose to drive to our office and bring them in, but they still put them in a drop box in our lobby.
Are the ones in your lobby counted in the 13 drop boxes?
No, since they're inside our office, we have 13. If you count those two external, exactly, external, outside of the building.
Okay, so the one outside of the building is counted.
Is counted as one of the 13, but the one in the entryway and in the lobby are not in that number.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
John.
I'm getting that if you ask one more question, Senator. So on the drop boxes, are they all, do they all have camera surveillance?
Oh, yes, we
Okay.
have 24-hour
Good,
camera surveillance.
Second
Yes.
question, on mail-in ballots, be it mail-in ballots or absentee ballots, is there a threshold that you monitor on the address that a number of ballots might be sent to? Is there a threshold that says, 12 at one address seems like a bit much here?
Not necessarily, because the law does allow for certain individuals to use the election office as their address. Homeless, indigent, a truck driver, for example, may use our office as our address because he may be a resident here, but has a post office box.
Right.
So, and also you have assisted living facilities.
But discounting those, I understand that, but discounting those, but is there a threshold that draws to your attention that, that seems like a large number of mail-in ballots going to X address?
X address? No, I would say we don't have any procedure in place for that. If, but no. So if somebody say they have 10 people living in a house that are registered there, then if all of them requested a ballot and everything checked out, we would send it there. To answer your question, no, we don't have any threshold for 123 Main Street as the number of ballots.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah Conrad.
Thank you, Chair Brewer. Just to follow up on my friend Senator Halloran's question there, because I know his intent would never be to punish big families who are civically minded and all may wish to vote.
Love big family.
Yes. And I think that's, one reason among many why we don't have a threshold in place for that. But I think that Brian, I want to give you a chance to maybe tease out one step further from your dialogue with Senator Halloran there. He's asking about what considerations, safeguards are in place when you get a request from a voter that seems suspect in regards to vote by mail.
Sure.
If somebody is requesting a ballot that isn't eligible or already cast their ballot or whatever it might be, there's mechanisms in place to say, hey, we don't just get a request and send it out to anybody at any time. We have to work through a very deliberative process there. Can you just maybe help us understand that?
Sure. Yeah, that's right. So, we have the voter ID component
Yeah.
now. You've got to be registered to vote and be at a valid address. As a general rule, you can't be registered at a commercial address. However,
Yeah.
some commercial addresses do have apartments in them.
Yeah.
Some small town funeral homes, even funeral home may have an apartment in it where a night watchman or a family lives or something of that
Right.
nature. So there are some exceptions to the commercial address rule. So you have to be registered, it has to be a valid address. We verify your signature. We verify the voter ID component. And then so there's that security mechanism. I will say this, when we print poll books for voters who go to the polling place, in the signature line, if they have requested an early voting ballot, there will be X's in there. There's all X's in there. So the signature line is not available for them to sign. So if they show up at the polling place and the poll worker sees they have all X's in there, in Douglas County, the poll workers are instructed to ask the voter and say, you have requested an early voting ballot. Now, it doesn't mean they've automatically voted that. It means they've requested one. But then they're instructed to say, if you have that ballot, do you have the ability to go and retrieve it and vote it and turn it in before 8 p.m. this evening at a drop box or the election office, because we can't accept early vote by mail ballots at the polling place. The reason we do that is because if they're unable to retrieve it, then we need to go through the provisional process, which takes longer for both poll workers and the voters. It's an option, but if they do have the early voting ballot, that's the easiest and simplest way for both the poll workers and the voters to cast their ballot, if they have the ability to retrieve that.
Yeah, and occasionally, and I know there's mechanisms in place, you don't get your ballot delivered, you spill a cup of coffee on it, whatever, there's ballot spoliation and cure provisions, all according to law for that when that does happen. But I think that is really helpful. And the very last question here, because I know we're really running late. I think a lot of the concern the committee's heard in regards to vote by mail over the last couple of years has been perhaps some confusion around vote by mail applications and actual ballots.
That's right.
So with the rise of vote by mail, you've seen candidate campaigns, issue campaigns, civic groups, political parties. A lot of people are sending voters
That's right.
vote by mail applications to request a ballot. So it's not unusual for, say, for example, my house where we, both of us are high propensity voters. We never miss an election. We'll even get, a deluge of political mail saying, hey, request your vote by mail ballot, get your vote by mail ballot. And we sometimes like to do it if we can't get to the polls, but I actually like to go to the polls too. So, so I don't always respond to those, but I think there's a lot of confusion sometimes amongst the general public, or even people who are concerned about election integrity saying, well, they got 4 vote by mail applications. They got 4 ballots.
Yeah.
They really didn't get 4 ballots. They got 4 requests. That's protected by free speech. People have a right to send political mail. A voter can throw it in the trash or they can respond to it. If they send in 2 vote by mail applications, they're only getting 1 ballot.
That's right.
Can you just maybe tease out those nuances perhaps?
Sure.
'Cause I think it's a source of confusion for people.
Sure. So I will say that's absolutely correct, that voters can request about a by mail ballot as many times as they want, but they're only going to get one ballot.
Yeah.
Because the system only allows for it. It's what we call duplicates.
Right.
And in the office, that's what we call duplicates. But to your point, you know, the parties
Yeah.
in the past have sent them out. There's a national organization now, the CVI, Center for Voter Information. They're out of Tennessee. I believe they just sent a huge mailing in Douglas County, like 60,000 people. We know many of those are going to be duplicates because many of those people have already submitted an application, but the system again will catch that. You know, so that's right. The system will not allow for numerous ballots to be sent to an individual. You know, we say, and I'm here to say, if anybody in the state of Nebraska gets more than one ballot, they should immediately call the sheriff or go to their election office, but save both ballots so that we can see them. Because there have been some that have said they have received numerous ballots, but to my knowledge,
Right.
nobody in the state of Nebraska has ever produced more than one ballot being sent to them. So our advice is definitely to save. If that were to happen, you have to save both of those and contact the property authorities in the election office or the Secretary of State's office.
Yeah.
So that we can review them.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
One of the issues that you hear about are the machines themselves. You use them on election day. Once you're done using them, how are they secure? Where do they go?
Sure. So once we're done using them, then they remain in Douglas County, they remain in our counting room, which is under the key swipe and double authentication at all times. The windows are always open in there. You know, the blinds are always raised. Cameras are always on, but then we have seals in Douglas County that we seal. We seal the ports back up when we're done, and we have a log that we keep those seal numbers on. So when we go to use them again, for whatever reason, we'll look in the log to make sure that the seal we're breaking matches the log.
All right, thank you. All right, when we're on, yes.
Yeah. go.
Really, a
Sanders.
quick question. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here, Brian.
Of course.
Good to have you here and your expertise. I'm going to try and make this a quick answer.
Okay.
It seems the most secure voting is day of. Show your ID, vote that day, but there's still a computer involved ultimately, right? To send the
A
information.
counting machine.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you think in our day and time, we can ever go back to just day of voting?
I think it would be extremely difficult because you have some counties here that are all by mail now. And that even goes back before the no excuse voting, I believe, to the 90s when that happened, the mid to late 90s, if I recall correctly. And I think it would be very difficult. I think you obviously would have lawsuits upon lawsuits if you tried to do that for disenfranchisement. I mean, an argument could be made for disenfranchisement. So to answer your question again, I suppose anything's possible, but I think it would be extremely difficult. And I think those who choose to vote by mail often, or those who need to vote by mail just on a rare occasion, maybe someone goes to the polling place all the time, but they got to have surgery or they got to be on a business trip. I truly believe there'd be a big pushback from the voters of Nebraska in a big way if we attempted to do that.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Chair.
One more time around.
All right, sorry, I got one more.
All right.
And I appreciate Senator Sanders asking that question. And I know Senator, she cares so deeply and is such a strong advocate for our veterans and military families, as is Senator Holdcroft, and of course, Senator Brewer and others on this committee as well. But I mean, we've had vote by mail for military and overseas voters
It goes back to I just read an article, goes back to the Civil
I
War.
was just going to say,
Really?
at least. Yeah, so I think that we need to be really clear that we don't perpetuate myths and misinformation that vote by mail is not safe. And I think that's why you don't have to respond to this with an editorial comment, it's my own. But I think that's why you've even seen an about face from, for example, the Trump campaign, which has led a lot of concern about vote by mail to now encouraging vote by mail because of what it means for turnout, because it is safe. You do not have to respond to that. I'm not asking you to respond to that, and we'll get into this later with Senator Holdcroft's closing. But I do think there's a very real danger when we have elected officials perpetuating myths and misinformation about our elections. It's another form of voter suppression, and it's wrong. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, Brian, thank you for your time. Thank you for your
Thank
patience.
you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for what you do.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Sherry, come on up. Now we get to understand how the smaller counties do it.
Small but mighty.
Welcome to the government committee.
Thank you, thank you. It's a bit chilly in here, so I'll try not to
Very
shiver
cold.
as I
Very
testify
cold.
here. My name is Sherry Schweitzer, SHERRY, SCHWEITZER. I am the Seward County Clerk. I've been in the office for over 46 years and 26 of that as the county clerk. So I know a little bit about elections. I remember when elections, and maybe some of you all remember, when we didn't have one ballot that you were given. Remember those pink and yellow and green pieces of paper that made like the partisan office and maybe the nonpartisan, the school boards. I remember getting all of those. I remember staying, oh gosh, one night I think I got home at 5 o'clock in the morning because everybody, we were hand counting. And so that was in the 80s that Seward County went to a machine counted results for their election. And it's been great ever since then. And I can say it was secure back then, being a youngster and just coming on to the election scene. And right now I can say it's still as secure and even more with our machines. So I made this testimony because I've never have been at an interim hearing before, but I would, you talked with Brian a lot, so I'm not going to go over some things, but a few things I thought need a little bit of attention. So I'm going to kind of go back and forth on this. So even though Brian, a lot of county clerks we do the same thing. So we adhere to the security part of it. We have drop boxes, we have things like that. So, but I'm just kind of a medium, kind of a smaller medium, I guess. I have about 12,000 voters. And so he has hundreds of thousands. And so anyhow, just on a smaller, I don't have 9 machines. I have 1, as most county clerks do. But anyhow, I thought I'd go through a few logistical things, even the more simpler things that we do to show that we are secure, even with everything from the beginning. So here you see on the first page of it, starting with number 1, I said we check the drop boxes to retrieve voted ballots. Those drop boxes are cemented in place, locked with only my office having a key, and checked multiple times each day and on the weekend, and they are becoming a key component in voting. So when those are checked, not only do 2 people from my staff, we have 2 people from a different party. So not to make it seem like only Republicans or Democrats are getting those, okay? And they are under camera security, as I know most counties are. One thing you talked about was early voting. Well, I have this kind of little motto these days that convenience is the name of the game. And right now you have young voters who they don't even go to the banks anymore. They don't even do anything with the checks. They don't even write a check. They do everything online, and that's what they want, convenience. They don't want to have to go to the bank to deposit a check. They don't want to have to go to the polling place to vote. They want to be able to vote have it sent to them, and then they vote. And I can say that until we had voter ID, I think it was almost more secure than going to the polling place. Because at that time, when somebody requests a ballot, their signature is checked. And now with the ID component, their driver's license, unless they use something else, is checked also. So, and they bring that ballot back on all types of hours. We have a camera on ours. We see them, those kids depositing. Kids, I do have Concordia University in Seward. We see them depositing that at 2:00 in the morning. That's when the kids are up. We have the young families who their kids are, they are in a lot of sports and a lot of activities. They want to do it on the weekend. They want to do it at 6 in the morning when they've on their way to work in the morning. So it's not only those that also want the time to read, and I don't have as many questions on my ballot, but I do have 8. So there is quite a bit of reading. So people do want to read it. Or they even might say, there's people on this ballot, I don't even know them. And it's maybe for like an NRD, something that maybe isn't as popular as a president or governor or regent. And they want time to investigate that candidate. So having that early voting ballot gives them time to do that. So I think that over time, we see an explosion of it. It's just as secure, but it's more prevalent as time goes on. We also, I said, make sure each voter requests an early ballot gets the correct ballot. We even in our office, remember, I'm smaller than Brian here, but we have more than one person check and make sure. Senator Lowe, are you getting the right ballot? Should you have 3 splits in your precinct? In fact, by the way, in my small county, I have 70 different kinds of ballots this year, more than ever before. And so we want to make sure you are getting the right ballot that has a commissioner or the right NRD on it. So we even go overboard and make sure that everything is almost done twice, okay? We also perform multiple test sets, and we've gone through that here a little bit. But on our scanners before the election to make sure they are tabulating correctly. I have 3 of my office staff mark a set of ballots. That's where I said I have 70 kinds of splits in my election. And we run them through the scanner. And in every instance, and I've been here quite a while, and I can tell you in every instance, if they didn't match, it was human error. It wasn't the machine. Somebody forgot they had left an overvote or something. We even check those things. Most people don't even realize that our system doesn't only check if you voted for a candidate or maybe a vote for 3. But what if somebody didn't vote for anybody? What if somebody didn't put anything in the write-in lines? That is called an undervote. So we even check the undervotes or the overvotes. We, by law, are required to instruct our election workers. We do that, and I do it kind of on purpose, close to the election. I usually do it on the Thursday before. This year it will be on Halloween, because I think that these people who have not volunteered, who are working the election, more or less, they only do it 2 times in Seward County every other year. So how to give that information to them, and then 30 days goes on or 3 weeks, they almost forget some of the information about it. And so anyhow, I do it as soon, close to the election as possible on purpose. During the time leading up to the election, every signature on every voting envelope is looked at. In 2020, COVID time, we had over 4,000 early voting ballots. That's a lot for Seward County. And so we were inundated. Yes, we put in a lot of overtime just because of that. It was something that doesn't happen, but hopefully every 100 years. Just recently, the clerks had a tabletop exercise and to plan for an emergency that might come up. We want people to think that, okay, if there is something happening, let's say a polling place has a gas leak. Brian had something like that happen in Douglas County. We had a county up way up north that their internet, their fiber was cut throughout the whole county. There are things like that. And electricity might be cut from a polling place. What to do with that? We want to make sure that we have these tabletop exercises so that we know and we can coordinate with the Secretary of State on that training so that we have a plan. We don't want people to think, oh my gosh, she took the ballots home. What did she do with them? You know, we want a plan so that it wouldn't appear questionable and we would go directly to a named second location for that emergency if it happened. So those are just a handful of processes we do, something that hasn't been talked about so much before, but I thought I would bring it up. I do want to make a couple notes here. I did about stuffing the ballot box. Somebody said something about that before. Well, I can tell you that if I had a drop box, first of all, if any of you have voted early, you put your ballot in an envelope and you check the signature. I'm not sure how anybody can stuff ballots in there that would have an identical signature that we have on record in our registration database. That's about all. I don't want to go any further if you've already had quite a few questions with Brian, but this is from a smaller perspective.
Thank you much, Sherry Schweitzer from Seward.
I know.
Our
It's
chair,
a tongue twister, let me know.
our chair, Senator Brewer, had to step out, so I'm going to sit in. Are there any questions? Wow, you're going to get off
Okay,
easy.
good, thank you.
Thank you very much for your your written notes as well. Thank you very much for your testimony. See no other questions. We'll move on to Wayne Benna, Deputy Secretary for State Secretary's Office. Welcome.
Just want to make a check that I have now changed to good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Wayne Benna, W-A-Y-N-E-B-E-N-A. I serve as Deputy Secretary of State Elections here on behalf of Secretary of State Bob Evans. And thank you for having this hearing. I know we're kind of running up against time limits. I do have statements, but I would just want to hear from the committee. Would you rather ask questions than hear from me right off the bat? And wanted to put that option out there.
Are there any questions for Deputy Benna? See no question. Maybe just give a brief overview,
Got it.
if you
All right.
would.
Let me start out by saying I'll skip the appetizers, I'll skip the entree and go right to dessert. Nebraska's elections are safe, reliable, accurate, and secure. Period. Hard stop. And over the last 4 years, I've come to you on many different levels, many different hearings, your questions from your constituents that all go to how we have made Nebraska's elections the gold standard throughout the country. In 2018, we worried with foreign interference with elections, and I can go into all the things that we did to secure our elections and continue to still do. In 2020, COVID had to adjust the way that we conduct elections, and let me push back, no restrictions were eased in regards to any election procedures. Our election procedures allowed us to be adaptable to more early voting happening at the polling site than at the polling site. Only 2 laws had to be adjusted during the COVID era. One to allow poll workers across county lines to be able to help out another county, and one that allowed early voting and registration in the offices to be shut down, so the county offices could be shut down to protect the public. And those are the only 2 laws and the only used in the primary that had to be changed for Nebraskans to have to run their elections. And in that election, the most ballots cast in the history of our state in a primary election happened. So I'm very proud of what our county elections officials did in there. We were rewarded with the census being late for the first time in the history of our country and had to figure out in 2021 how to do redistricting so the 2022 primary could happen. People are surprised to learn is more likely that the 22 primary would have had to been moved rather than the 2020 primary. That's how close it came through the redistricting data, not being in on time to be able to do that election. We came up with a plan. There was a special session. We kept a few senators off of a mountain for a few months. That vacation got delayed, but we got it done. And with half the time, we were able to have the 22 primary. And after that, it was voter ID. And this body passed a bipartisan voter ID bill that had 0 lawsuits, and less than 80 people statewide did not bring their IDs to the polling sites. And when I say that to my election directors across the country, how did that happen? How would that possibly happen? Because it hasn't happened. It was probably the most successful implementation of voter ID in the country. And I just say it's the Nebraska way. And so our election officials have risen to each and every challenge that is presented to them in the last 7 years that I have overseen the election division for the Secretary of State's office. In regards to the security aspect of what we have done, we have installed computer intrusion detection devices, not only into some key areas in the state of Nebraska, but also under our voter registration system. That computer intrusion detection device was the first time that a device has been placed on a private vendor of a voter registration system, and to make sure that our voter registration system is not prone to being intruded into. And won us a national award for election innovation, has now been replicated in 7 other states. I can say is when it comes to election security, our office has worked on 4 different projects in the last 2 years that has culminated into this. By the November election, all 93 of our counties will have their websites scanned for vulnerabilities on a regular basis by Homeland Security to make sure that there's nothing that could penetrate into the county system. All 93 counties have email addresses that are .gov email addresses, which means they can't be spoofed. Which meaning is that sometimes you can see that someone can do it could be dickclark@yahoo.com, but all of a sudden it's dick.clark@yahoo.com, and it could easily be spoofed as your address. You can't spoof a .gov address because it needs to be registered. And so when you have that name, you're only going to get that name. And so you're not going to be able to spoof the email address. By the general election, all 93 of our counties are going to have .gov websites. Again, you're not going to be able to set up a fake website with misinformation. You're going to know if it doesn't have .gov, it's not the Douglas County Elections website or the Sarpy County Elections website. And finally, all 93 of our counties, and this is something that took a very long time, and we're very proud to be able to say that all 93 of our counties now have either an internal county IT department or a managed service provider that they can go to use and manage the security of their election processes. No longer is it the nephew in the basement helping to run the county internet service. They're all using a professional organization or internal IT to manage manage any vulnerabilities and correct those vulnerabilities. And that's something that a whole lot of other states can say right now. Because of the things that we are doing, the director of CISA, you've heard about from Homeland Security, will be visiting Nebraska next month to take a tour of operations and learn from not only our state, but the 4 other states in our region to learn about what we're doing and what's in the water of why we are doing it so well. And I have a great pride in our 93 county election officials that are getting it done for their constituents and for the state. We've talked about the 3 test decks and the testing that happens before the election, the 2 mock elections before every election that tests the capability and load capacity of our election reporting website, the air gap computer process, which I'm happy to answer questions upon, and our post-election audits to make sure that what's being counted is being, and the coding in our system is being accurately represented in the votes that are counted by doing a manual count of 10% of the precincts statewide. We talked a little bit about voter ID, and I'll leave it there. I'll have a few closing comments if you would allow, but I'll stop there and answer the many questions that I've heard being saved for me, and look forward to them. So with that, I'll just pause and I'll have a few concluding statements.
Thank you. Questions for Deputy Benna? Senator Halloran.
Thank you, Wayne, for being here. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. I've got a number of questions, and I won't belabor those. I might send those via an email. I know the public would like to know some of those questions answered too, but there's some new questions I have from previous testimony, and we talked about that a little bit with the air gap computers. Strikes me that, that becomes kind of a central hub, particularly for Douglas County, when you have X number of voting machines and they all have to communicate to that air gap, puts on thumb drives on a disk, sent to you. I think that's kind of the chain we're talking about here. Seems like there's a lot of areas of vulnerabilities there. Previous testimony from E&S suggested that they are open to an audit of a machine, several machines possibly, to test whether or not they have vulnerability being connected to the internet. Question, is the Secretary of State okay with that?
So let's start the first part of your question. I'll go then. That's two different questions going to the air gap computers, and we're going to the testing. One component that wasn't really talked about in the air gap computer process is that each part of this process has a paper trail. Okay, so from each one of the counting machines, Douglas is the anomaly because they have multiple machines, but let's take it for Seward County, for example. They have one counting machine. Okay, they can count up their ballots, and during each batch, they can print a report of what the results of that counting says. And then they take the military grade USB, take that out, take that to the computer to compile those results. From that computer, they can print out the results and see that this matched this. And then they pull the CD, in some it's a USB drive, out the results out to put into an internet connected computer to upload those results not only to their own websites for everything, but to our election night reporting system that's for the state. Before they press send, they can see the results that are going to be uploaded and match that with the report coming out of the computer of what they're going to upload. And so they can see that those match before they even press send. And once they press send, they can see that on our site that theirs matches ours. And at the end of the night, before we even let them go home, they have to verify their final report with what they see, what we see on the computer and on the final. And again, let me reiterate, all of these results are unofficial. Everything is unofficial because after the fact, we are canvassing the vote, we are doing the manual audit before we certify to say that these are the actual results. So there are many steps in the process and checks and balances to make sure that what's going on through this process matches up to everything that's going on paper. And then ultimately backing one up, all of our ballots are paper, they're kept, and they're manually audited after the election. The second part is in regards to the forensics audit.
Can I interrupt
Yeah.
just a second?
Yeah.
They're all manually audited?
What's that? So what had been done in the past was a random draw of 2 to 3% of the precincts statewide. So that meant not all counties would get a precinct. In listening to testimony and comments made by this body and others, the secretary expanded that in the 2022 general election to 10%. And when we did that, I asked for two things. One, every county had to have at least one precinct audited. So every county had data that they could take back to their county boards and their constituents to say, my results from my audit matched what my machine said. So to do that, there's approximately 1,326 precincts. That means 130 precincts that are audited. That means all 93 each will get one. The larger counties are given more because they have more ballots to account for that. And then the last 20 or so is a random draw that, so some of the other 93 counties get, they always say, oh, I'm the unlucky one. I could have to do 2 precincts this election. But it's all a random draw done after the election and not told to the officials until the next day. And the second part about that we did is that I made sure this manual audit happened before certification to our office. Before it could be done after certification. And what I said was, it doesn't make a difference. If you find a problem after certification, it becomes a little bit harder. So let's do this before certification. So if there is an issue, you can go back and be able to fix that. And that 10% is what's going to be occurring for the presidential general election. And so when you're looking at the coding for, let's say, President of the United States, sheriff, and then a state issue such as U.S. Senate, or a local issue such as a county sheriff, that's the coding that goes to all the ballots in the county. So if you're finding a problem in one, if you're finding that there's an issue that ends up going back to coding, that's something that you can look back to all of the ballots. So it doesn't matter if you don't have to do all of the precincts in order to find an anomaly that makes you want to go back and figure it out. And to this point, we have never had a manual audit that has ever been off more than 1 or 2 ballots, which can be accounted for due to human error, or a ballot going through the machine twice by accident, or a mark that a person doing the hand count counted as a mark that the machine didn't because it was very light because the voter didn't follow instructions about the ballot fully darkening the oval. So the manual audit has been a very important piece of the puzzle to show that even though we've tested before the election, the county machines did what they were supposed to on election day prior to certifying the ballot. The second part in regards to a forensic audit, we are aware of ES&S's willingness to do this. We are open to that. Prior had been anybody just wanted to come in and open up the doors, and it would void the warranty. And we do have in our contracts on the voter registration system, and that independent third-party audits have to happen in regards to being able to try to penetrate into the system to see there are vulnerabilities. And our office has worked with outside third parties to run a pilot project to test the accuracy and the software within our machines. That information is currently being compiled in a report that we hope to be released before the election. We have done that, and I'm sure Chris didn't want to talk about that because it's my information to talk about, but we are doing that work because we do think it is important to make sure that we have that credibility that our machines are working in many different capacities outside of what we're already doing.
So it's an audit above and beyond the tabulating?
Yes.
It's an audit to see whether they can be accessed?
It's an audit to make sure that the software that was certified is still the software that's being used in the machines to be able to count the ballots, that nothing's been modified.
So it's a test to see whether they tabulate correctly?
It's a test to make sure that how it's coded has not been changed, that in one aspect, yes, that it will tabulate correctly.
Is part of that testing going to determine whether or not it's accessible on the internet?
This particular test that we're doing beyond what we already do will not have that, but the mere fact that it is certified by the EAC won't allow for internet capability to occur. And ES&S has taken these machines to independent laboratories, such as the laboratory in Idaho, to be able to test to make sure that that is occurring. And we've seen, and we see those reports, and we know that our machines are not connected to the internet. But beyond, if there are things that we are open to doing those type of testing.
Okay. I had put in a request to Chairman Brewer to have a testifier testify who is a certified cybersecurity and information white hat hacker, if you will. He was on teams. He has led teams in vulnerability management, security tests, and evaluation, and system accreditation. Additionally, his name was Clay Parikh. I don't know if you're familiar
I'm
with
not him. familiar.
Okay. Additionally, Parikh has supported civil and Department of Defense agencies within the U.S. government, plus international customers such as NATO. Holds a Master's of Science in Cybersecurity, Computer Science from University of Alabama in Huntsville. He's also held the following certifications: Certified Ethical Hacker, CEH, and Certified Hacking Forensic Investigator, CHFI. This was invited testimony only for this interim study. And I was told that if he showed up, that the Secretary of State's office would not be represented at this hearing. Is that true?
I'm not familiar with what conversations occurred in regards to this hearing. I was just told that I was invited to be here.
So the Secretary of State's office would be okay with a forensic investigator investigating the vulnerability of being accessed by the internet. I don't think anyone has any concern that the tabulators tabulate accurately. Tabulation is not a particularly complicated mechanism to do. But I think most concerns center around whether or not there's accessibility on the internet somewhere in the process that would change the results, right? And nobody wants that to happen. So would the Secretary of State's office be okay with someone like this Clay Parikh?
Well, I, without knowing this person, their qualifications, this is a conversation that has to happen between the Secretary of State's office and ES&S to make sure that whoever is doing this has the qualifications and.
Well, I just read his qualifications.
I understand, and all of that would need to be vetted before that to being allowed.
So the answer is you're not sure.
I'm saying is we would be open to testing. Who does that testing is up for proper vetting.
Okay, well then say there was two potential investigators, one authorized by you and one authorized by the committee. Would you be okay with it?
This committee looked at legislation last year, I believe, that would have the state patrol hire an investigator that could do this type of work. That would be, I believe this, we were supportive if that was the way the legislature wanted to go, if that's the person within state government or this committee wanting to be able to do that work. But outside of that, it would have to be something that's vetted between the Secretary of State's office and the vendor to make sure that it is the right fit.
The right fit?
The right fit to be able to do this. As Mr. Washington mentioned, you just can't have someone coming off the street wanting access to our machines. So that vetting is a very important process to make sure that it is a credible person doing this work. Because the last thing I want is someone going into our machines and planting something.
Okay, I understand that. So would the Secretary of State's office put down some criteria of credentials that would be okay for the Secretary of State to authorize an investigation?
I'm willing to take that back to the Secretary and look at that.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Senator Conrad.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bennett, for being here. And you heard my exchange maybe earlier with Mr. Cruz. If you could just help us and we can go through a lightning round since we've intruded upon everybody's lunch hour here and we can follow up in greater detail if need be. But again, I just wanted to lift up some of the areas of concern that the committee's heard about in recent years and just get your assessment as to whether or not there's appropriate safeguards in place to address these issues or if there's legislation needed for additional reform. Are there safeguards in place in regards to voter registration to weed out those who are not eligible?
Yes.
Okay, great. Are there safeguards in place to ensure that people who are deceased are removed from the voter rolls?
Yes.
Are there procedures in place to ensure that if an individual attempts to vote twice, that would be caught and would not, in fact, be allowed to cast 2 ballots?
Yes.
Or multiple ballots, I guess. Are there mechanisms and safeguards in place to ensure that there's no voter impersonation kind of fraud from happening where I show up, even though I'm Danielle Conrad, I say I'm my mom, Stephanie Nankis, and that I want to cast her ballot?
With the new voter ID provisions, if you're trying to do that at the polling site, the poll worker will look at your name and your photo to make sure that it matches what's the name that's in the poll book to be able to do that on your.
Now, it would be weeded out very quickly. Sherry Schweitzer and her team in Seward would quickly identify that was not going to work out. I remember voting in our rural precinct, and we'd come in and they'd say, "Hey, Danielle, your mom's already been in, your dad hasn't been in." And so voter ID looks really different in a lot of our rural precincts. And then the last piece is just to put a finer point on it, but there's significant criminal penalties in place under Nebraska law and federal law for voter fraud, for impersonation, for malfeasance related to ineligible people voting, for attempting to vote twice. Is that accurate from a general perspective?
Yes, and they've been put into use just as early as the 2022 election. Individuals were prosecuted for falsifying their voter registration, and living at an address that was not theirs in order to vote in an election they were not entitled to, and they were prosecuted.
In Nebraska?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm aware of one case where some new Americans had voted by mail and then also attempted to vote on election day. And that was also identified through current safeguards and dealt with in the criminal justice system.
Correct.
So I think it's fair to say, let me just get your assessment. And we've heard from some of the other people, and we've heard about this for the last couple of years. Are Nebraska elections safe and secure from your perspective?
Absolutely.
Okay. Are there additional legislative reforms that we need to undertake in the next legislative session to increase voter security?
Our office is always open to ways to make the process better, but it has to come from the standpoint that our elections are safe, accurate, and secure. Coming from any position other than that, then you need to bring evidence to the contrary of why that should be. And time and time again, that evidence has never been presented to our office to change that opinion.
Okay. I think that'll do it. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Thank you, Vice Chair.
All right. Additional
Or
questions?
Chair, sorry. I didn't realize she's right back there.
I know, it's a little.
Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Bennett, thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing those that have concerns of our safe, that our elections are safe. So thank you, and continue to keep them safe and reliable.
All right. Anything else? All right, Wayne, thank you for your time. Oh, yes.
I kind of paused because there's one thing I wanted to bring up.
Go for it.
I'm going to end with this. I've talked to you about how Nebraska has been the forefront of many different election security concerns and many different new ways of doing it that's been copied in many other states. But unfortunately, this week, Nebraska was on the forefront of something nationally that I wish I wouldn't have to. We were the first state that got their mail on Monday to find a envelope from a organization that was pretty notoriously named that we weren't going to open the envelope. We set that envelope aside. We contacted the state patrol, who assessed that the hazmat team should be in. Lincoln Fire and Rescue came to take a look at it. They x-rayed it, no explosives, but a powdery substance was found inside. Everything was locked down. It was tested. It was a harmless substance, but meant to intimidate. While I couldn't see the letter because it was being used as evidence, I asked the question, was it a national letter or was it addressed to specifically our office? They said it was nationally oriented. I instantly got on the phone to our federal partners, FBI, Postal Inspector, and alerted the states as fast as we could that I think this is going national. And in fact, it did. That day, Wyoming, Iowa, Kansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee all received the same letter. And based upon that intelligence, evacuations were a little bit shorter. People knew what to test for and what to look for. But more importantly, that intelligence allowed that the mail over the next 2 to 3 days was able to be intercepted. People were ready for it or what have you. I talked about that our elections are safe, accurate, and secure. And we are willing to work whatever we need to do to be able to enhance that process if we start from that level. For those that don't want to start at that level and don't provide the evidence, it's becoming dangerous. And now it is letters going to all 50 states with demands very similar to the demands that you've been hearing for the last 4 years, with white powdery substances that my frontline workers may or may have to open and be intimidated against. And this is very dangerous. And I don't think anybody in this room, whether or not you like the way our elections are run or don't like our way our elections are run, want any election official to have to go through that. And I don't want any election official to have to go through that. So if you want election reform, start from the aspect that we are the gold standard here in Nebraska, or provide me evidence otherwise. Outside of that, it is allowing the individuals to try to intimidate and do these things to try to take us off our game. We didn't evacuate. We kept doing our job. And we'll continue to do that work for all of our 93 counties and their constituents. But I just want to end by saying is that the more that we have unreasonable expectations or unreasonable requests, it leads to situations where 50 states get the same letter with a powdery substance. And this is not where we want our election administration to be. I'll leave it at that. Thank you for this hearing today.
Thank you for your testimony, and thanks for sharing that.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I appreciate that. There are people out there that are deranged that do these kind of things. But you made a comment that provide evidence to you that there's something wrong. The burden of proof is the other way around. The burden of proof should be on the Secretary of State's office to provide evidence to us that there's nothing wrong.
I appreciate that perspective, and I would say is that the data we've provided over the last 4 years and the methods that we've taken, and listening to this committee on the certain pieces of data that they've wanted to see, we have done and complied with.
well, for 8 years, you've answered the call and provided whatever I've asked of you. So, Wayne, thank you for your service to Nebraska. Thanks for your testimony. With that, we will wrap up with Senator.
Thank you.
Right, I took my 1 hour close and cut it down to 30 minutes.
Yeah, appreciate it. Senator Holdcroft.
Yeah, I want to thank all the testifiers for coming. This was mostly about information gathering and trying to figure out how do we want to move forward. Is there legislation that we want to bring in the 109th legislature? It's interesting. I saw a survey that ranked what factors are, how do they affect voter confidence, the voters' confidence in it. And And the number one factor that instills the most confidence is whether or not your candidate won. So if your candidate wins, we got a good system. If it doesn't, well, then we got problems. But I think the key going forward is to try to, make it as transparent as possible and include as much of the citizenry in the process as possible as we go forward with our election processes. And with that, I will be happy to have a discussion with Senator Conrad about mail-in ballots.
Okay.
Are you gonna do that now?
Well, I'm open to your questions.
Sure.
Oh, Senator Conrad.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, Senator Holdcroft. And I did hear your opening on my way in. I'm sorry I wasn't here for it in person, but you might have heard some of the dialogue in previous testifiers about, there seems to be recent concern, and you touched upon it in your opening, around the rise of vote by mail, particularly during the COVID pandemic. And then since, actually, a lot of Nebraskans and Americans have decided to continue voting by mail since that point in time. So my question to you is, do you have concerns about vote by mail generally, or just for certain voters?
No, generally. I
Okay.
think it's just that we have increased the volume or the percentage of people who are voting, and that just makes us more vulnerable to opportunities for fraud.
So on that same logic, then, do you question the results in the 11 or 12 counties in Nebraska that have had all vote by mail elections for quite some time?
Well, we don't have any choice in those matters. I mean, that's the way we have to conduct those, and they're generally pretty small in numbers. I mean, we're talking 50% of Douglas County, 70, 80,000. How many people are voting by mail? 125,000 people voting by mail in Douglas County. But how many of those counties in western Nebraska, what are those numbers looking like?
So your concerns are solely related to volume?
Yes, because I think that, from the time, well, think about this also. If you vote at the ballot, or you go to the office, you can vote at the election commissioner's office 30 days, the same period you have for early voting by mail. You can go, you can show your ID. They can verify the photo ID. Okay, so, and the same thing at the ballots. Give me your ID, look at it, look at the person, and verify it that way. With mail-in ballots, you don't have that feature. Your only feature for confirming the voter ID is that signature, and it's an eyeball signature. And I can tell you, in the military, we would never accept a signature as a form of ID. So that's my biggest concern is, we go through all the rigor and the people spoke. They want voter ID, photo voter ID, and we're applying that, and it works at the offices and at the polling places. But we're not really using photo ID when we do mail-in ballots, and that concerns me.
Okay, so you don't have a concern about vote by mail for military voters?
No.
You don't have a concern about vote by mail for rural voters?
No.
You only have a concern about vote by mail for metropolitan voters?
I would like to go back to a no excuse. In rural, we don't have enough poll people. The reason we're doing it out there is because we have to do it out there. I'd love to do away with mail-in ballots out in the rural areas if you could find enough poll workers to be able to man the polls. But that's the reason we do mail-in ballots out in those areas.
I don't know if the history would back you up on that, but okay.
But as far as, we got away from this, you had to have a valid excuse. And being in the military or being in a nursing home or being, in surgery was a valid excuse. And you could request a ballot and list that excuse. And that's what I think we ought to go back to. I am not proposing to do away with mail-in ballots. I am proposing to go back to you need to have a valid excuse. And the best thing to do is vote early and go to the commissioner's office and vote early. It's not anything different.
Okay. So You would have preferred that Nebraska not adopt no excuse absentee balloting almost decades ago.
Yes.
And you've brought legislation to change that during your time in the legislature?
In my 2 years here, I have not yet.
Okay. And your.
And I don't know that I will.
Sure.
Okay, that's why we're here. That's why we're asking the questions. And we'll continue to ask those questions, and then we'll
Sure.
decide whether or not we need to bring something forward.
So your concerns about no excuse vote by mail that's been in place in Nebraska for decades, maybe 2, maybe longer, exact number on that I don't have off the top of my head, is the primary concern that you're bringing forward today.
I think.
And primarily, I guess, in metropolitan counties, not for overseas voters or rural counties. But how would changing that aspect of no excuse or excuse vote by mail, how would that enhance voter integrity or security?
Because it forces people then to go to the election commission office to vote or go to the ballots where they have to produce a photo ID and people can look at the ID and look at the person.
Okay. And then
And that is, to me, that's a more secure way to conduct elections.
okay. Are you aware of widespread voter fraud in Nebraska?
I am not.
Okay. And I don't remember off the top of my head, but did you vote against the legislation to implement voter ID and enact the will of the people that this committee led forward in the recent
I
legislative
voted for
session?
voter ID, yes.
Okay. Did you raise concerns about how voter ID was being implemented at that time? I don't remember everybody's floor speech. That's why I'm just
I
trying to.
didn't. I think it was raised and I agreed with the issue, but it was an improvement over what we've done in the past and what we had in the past. And now we have another opportunity to make it even better.
Well, and I understand Senator Holdcroft, we all have to make challenging decisions with our vote. Sometimes the good outweighs the bad or vice versa. And it's rarely a perfect piece of legislation that works its way through. But I just want to go back and revisit that. So do you, Senator Holdcroft, plan to respect and honor the results of the upcoming November election, regardless of who wins?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
mean, when I started in my opening statement, I said, I have confidence in the Secretary of State and the systems that we have in place.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean there can't be some improvements. I mean, I have constituents who have some genuine concerns about
Right.
how things are done with, well, across the board, across the 4 areas that I'm looking at. And I don't necessarily agree with everything they're saying. I agree with Wayne. Let's see let's, bring me the evidence. Bring me the evidence, and I'm happy to take it forward to the Secretary of State and get it evaluated. But there are some things that I have mostly in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Partly because of COVID, partly because of voter ID, that we've kind of gotten out of whack as far as some of, in particular the mail-in voting and getting to the percentages that we're talking about in Douglas County. I think there's also a piece to consider is it really ramped up during COVID, but we seem to be leaning forward now as election commissioners to encourage early voting by mailing out to all the registered voters. Here's an application for early voting. Would you like to do it? We're also getting a lot of other organizations that are encouraging early voting. That to me is, as I say, it just opens us up, I think, to more opportunities for fraud.
Okay. And then just 2 final questions there. So you're concerned that Nebraskans or Americans or civic organizations or political parties or candidates are encouraging voters to vote. You're concerned that they're letting
You
people
mean
know
early voting?
about. Well, when you say like that you're concerned about people encouraging vote by mail or encouraging voting, what exactly is your concern and what exactly is your remedy that wouldn't run afoul of the First Amendment?
Well, you mean, they can encourage, as opposed to within the limits of the law in Nebraska. And if the law in Nebraska is only military, or you have to have an excuse, well, then go ahead and encourage all you want, but you'll have to still comply with what the state of Nebraska's requirements are.
Okay. Senator Holdcroft, last question. Senator Holdcroft, do you think it's beneficial for our democracy to perpetuate myths and misinformation about the security and integrity of our elections?
To promulgate myths and mysteries, is that what you said?
Myths and misinformation.
Misinformation. Well, no, and I don't expect that I'm doing that here. Is that what you're accusing
No,
me
I'm
of
asking
doing?
you a general question because I'm trying to understand if we have a clear record that there hasn't been evidence brought forward of voter fraud in Nebraska, if we have agreement that our elections are safe and secure, and if you haven't proposed any solutions to make improvements on the accuracy or security or safety of our elections, what is the point of this hearing?
Well, I did make a number of suggestions for improving.
To remove,
I would,
to require a reason to vote by mail and to stop people from encouraging voters to vote by mail are your solutions that you've brought forward?
okay, so I identified 4 areas. Do you want me to reread my opening statement?
No, I listened to your opening statement. My question is, what specifically are you asking the next legislature to do to improve safety, accuracy, or security that isn't in place today?
Well, I would like to see a higher percentage of post-election audits to verify the machines. I'd like to see spot checks of machines.
But those things are happening today.
No, they're not happening
Those two things are
today.
happening today.
No, they're not happening today.
The
We're only
secretary-
doing 10%. I would like to see more. I'd like to see 50% or 100%.
Okay.
We aren't doing any spot checks on machines. I mean, yes, and second, because of this hearing, the Secretary of State is willing to entertain that.
Okay.
We have seen, and it's interesting that there were questions about the registration software, Power Profile, which is maintained by the Secretary of State now, that when Commissioner Cruz was asked about that, he deferred to the Secretary of State to answer any questions about our statewide registration program. Why isn't that being managed at the county level where the people are? Why is it that the county commissioner doesn't feel comfortable answering questions about the software for the statewide registration? Now, there are benefits to the statewide registration. I mean, the state-to-state communication that allows us to identify when people have moved and registered in other states, that's a great benefit. It allows us to clean that up. But we still need to have in the counties some quality control of the registration. And I think that's been taken away by the current software.
Okay.
somewhat.
So you're saying there isn't safeguards in place for voter registration in Nebraska today?
That's not what I said.
Okay. why don't
In
you
fact, I just
clarify that?
outlined how this software allows us to communicate with other states and
Yeah, I
remove them.
understand
So there
how
are
that-
good things, but there are some things at the county level that used to be done with, door-to-door kind of checks that aren't being done anymore.
Okay.
And so now I think we need to take a look at that. I don't have the legislation here in front of me.
Okay.
That's the purpose of this interim hearing, is to identify the areas where we might bring forward the legislation in
Sure.
109.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to continuing the dialogue with you leading up to the next legislative session. But it does sound like some of the issues that you are concerned about, and maybe the details or nuance of that is beyond the scope of the hearing today, as we're already running over, already have legal safeguards in place to ensure the integrity of our registration, to ensure the integrity of the vote by mail, to ensure the integrity of in-person, to ensure the integrity of E-Day, to ensure the integrity of provisional ballots, to ensure integrity of tabulation. So I'm not quite sure what additional remedies you're looking for or would need to be in place unless there is a deficiency in the existing legal safeguard that exists today.
Well, I think there are some deficiencies that we need to investigate. And I've outlined them. Have I not outlined them?
Well, you've indicated that you have a feeling that you'd like to see a larger audit or a larger recount, but I'm not aware of any information you or other testifiers have brought forward today that show that there's a need, that there's voter fraud in Nebraska.
Okay.
Did I miss that part of the hearing when I was coming in?
Well, I mean.
Where is the evidence, Senator Holdcroft? Beyond your feeling or
Well, my
kind of
feelings-
general
I mean,
instinct?
my understanding of the way this processes and my experience,
Yeah.
that doesn't count for anything as far as being able to, ask for an interim hearing to investigate these issues. That's what this is about.
Sure, but you haven't seen any evidence of voter fraud in Nebraska, or have you?
Personally, I cannot point at anything right now.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
All right, before I let you go, not a lot of things hit a raw nerve on me, but you found one, so we're gonna go back to that. Now, you talked about only a signature and that not being valid, or it shouldn't be what we use, but if we go back and look, when you register to vote, that's when they check your ID, they're checking the signature, they're checking the picture and the source document. So
Yes, but
how are you saying only a signature? I don't understand
well,
that.
when you can register by internet. And then, so how is that person who gets your application by the internet seeing you at the typewriter in your face to be able to compare it to the photo ID? So the only thing he has to verify that is he's got a picture. He's got a picture.
Right.
But he can't compare the picture to anything. He can only compare the signature to the signature. That's his validation.
Well, I believe that, all right, we'll double check on this, but I believe the county's got the ability to verify beyond just the internet capability. So we'll check on that to see.
Well, the requirement was for photo ID, was it not?
Right.
So how are we using the photo in that validation?
Well, but if whether it be a passport or a driver's license correlates to a ID and a picture, aren't you doing that when you put that onto the ballot?
Well, when you compare a photo ID, you're comparing it to the person's face. So where's the person's face?
So you're saying that if you do it online, at no point is there any source document that has a picture of a human being,
When you apply.
right?
When you apply, I mean, I suppose you can set up a webcam, but it's not set up that way correctly. When you apply,
You
you
don't
type
have
in
to-
that information.
You don't have to scan in anything. You don't have to do anything.
No, you don't. I mean,
Just type in your name and sign.
in fact, you don't even have to sign it, because what they do is they take the signature off of your driver's license, your signature of record. So you don't even sign when you make your application online for voter registration.
You're putting that on record. All right, any additional questions?
Just to clarify, two tiny
Yes.
things there. Thank you so much, Chair. But Senator Holdcroft, and I'm not a tech expert either, believe me, you might have a lot more on me there, but I do think that maybe it would be beneficial for us all to just kind of maybe continue the conversation and walk through the process, because I'm not sure that we got it quite right on the record today for how online registration works and then casting ballot works after that, because there are requirements in place if you do the online registration for how you show and utilize your ID in subsequent elections. So I think that I just want to make sure that we're all clear. And we took that up in the voter ID implementation legislation together. And that was also in place, additional safeguards in regards to ensuring identity. before voter ID and when Nebraska adopted online voter registration. So I do just want to bring that point up. And again, two things. I'm not aware of any evidence in Nebraska at this time for widespread voter registration fraud or impersonation. And it sounds like perhaps you're not either. And if there are those issues happening, there are significant criminal penalties in place. If somebody were to try and register to vote in my name or my kid's name or what have you, I mean, that's a serious crime. There's a whole nother area of criminal law out there to address these areas of fraud as well. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes, but what are you saying? Are you telling me that as a senator, I cannot bring forward and ask these kind of questions at an interim hearing?
You can bring forward any idea you wish. That's absolutely, you're right. My question to you in terms of how you utilize your platform and power is, if you're asking the committee to take up an issue without evidence and that's already addressed in other aspects of the law, what is the point of the hearing?
Well, it's to discuss those issues to see if there is evidence or.
But you have brought none to this committee today.
And it's not my role to bring the evidence. I brought testimony to explain, and we had people ask questions to try to pull out. And I think there's enough areas of concern or questions here that we can take it further as far as what legislation we want to bring forward.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
All right, going back to the issue before, some of this, it didn't make sense to me why it would be that way. So if I understand it correctly, and I'm trying to double check here, that when you physically go and provide your photo ID, when you get your driver's license, that's your ID. What you're doing later is you're simply taking that driver's license number and you're correlating that to what's already on file. So the picture is still there. So the only way you could do that is if you had all the information to include that driver's license number and you were trying to take someone's ID essentially.
I don't disagree with that, but what is the function of a photo ID is to compare that ID to the in-person face of the person that you're validating. And when you're on a computer, there's no way to do that. If you go to the commissioner's office or you go to the ballots, they ask you for a photo ID, they look at it, they look at your face, and then they do the valuation. When you register for a mail-in ballot, when you register for voting, there's no comparison. If you do it online, there's no comparison between your photo ID and your actual face. So how do you verify who's typing this information is? All they have to have is they have to steal your ID card. I mean, your driver's license card. It's got all the information you need to register for to vote.
And you think that someone would do that, knowing full well that's a felony offense. So that means go to jail, don't ever own a gun, don't get a vote, just to get a vote.
Well, I mean, it's possible. So
Okay.
that's why and if this committee doesn't feel that's a problem, then.
Well,
So
no, I'm
be
just trying to make sure we get, we're talking about voter security in the process, and I want to make sure, because that's still a very raw issue with me, the 14 hours that we had to debate voter ID. And it may not be perfect, but it's a lot better than we were before we had voter ID.
Certainly is at the polls and at the end voting in person. But if you're not voting in person, then a photo ID it's only the signature that's the validating entity.
Last question.
Well,
I
we
swear,
disagree on
last question.
All right,
I
this
swear.
is your last.
I swear. And Senator Holdcroft is always so generous and gracious with his time and dialogue with the committee. But Senator, and this came up in a previous discussion about poll watchers and observers who are keeping tabs on what's happening at the election office and at the polling places. The right that is sacrosanct is for the voter themselves. And do you think the government knows better about how voters want to vote, shouldn't we leave it up to the individual voter to decide how they wish to vote?
And, well, yes, but why, and how
That's all
are
I
we,
need, Senator.
how are we violating that with poll watchers?
No, we're not. My question is, if
How?
50% of Nebraskans want to exercise their right to vote by voting by mail, I mean, doesn't that decision belong to the voter themselves? You're saying that those voters are all wrong and that the government knows better and that we should require everybody to vote in
The only
person?
reason those people are allowed to vote by mail is because that's the way the statute is written in the state of Nebraska. Now, I am looking at that and saying, I don't think that's necessarily, and I have a number of constituents who say they don't think that should be the way it is. They think it ought to be by, you need to have a valid excuse for that. That's the way it ought to be. And so I'm representing that opinion
Okay,
going forward.
very good. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, we need to wrap up or we're going to be sitting here to start the next one in a matter of a few minutes here. So with that, we need to read
I'm not
in,
involved in that.
we're going to read in some numbers here. As far as for opponents, we had 95, opponents, we had 4. We had 5 in the neutral. With that, we will close the hearing on LR 357. And we'll see everybody back.